is looking at you, kid.
I'm Charles Foster Kane!
Hey, Stella!
Suck on this.
What is happening, everybody? James Hancock here. Today, I am joined by David Lambert for a special video celebrating the 75th anniversaries of a double feature of Westerns by the great Anthony Mann, Winchester 73, which was first released to the public today, back in 1950, while the Furies was released a few weeks later on August 16th. And thankfully, both movies have been lovingly preserved by the Criterion Collection, and David and I both have these movies in our collection. And just to complete the hat trick, though, Anthony Mann released yet another Western, Devil's Doorway, on September 15th of 1950. And these films were not necessarily shot in this order, but that's the order in which they were released. And luckily, David Lambert has agreed today to share his unique insights into this fascinating chapter of Western movie history. So, Mr. Lambert, welcome back. What have you been up to since our last recording?
What have I been up to? A lot of podcast appearances. It's making art, just posting Western stuff, and just some things I can't really get too far into in case they don't pan out.
Gotcha. Fair enough. Now, since we released our Elmore Leonard double feature episode that we did with William Mendoza, have there been any other podcast appearances that I have failed to, take notice of?
I'm not sure. I think maybe within the same day or the same 2 days, I had that podcast and then an appearance on Tumbleweeds and TV Cowboys, a podcast all about Western movies and TV shows. And on that one, I did Westerns based on Western TV shows. So we did Will Penny based on an episode of The Westerner. We did The Hunting Party based on an episode of The Big Valley. And we did The Hateful Eight based on an episode of The Rebel. And then a podcast I did months ago with Pink Smoke has just recently come out. And that is
just, the Wyatt Earp movies that are not about Wyatt Earp.
Yes. Wyatt Earp movies without Wyatt Earp. So they're movies that are based on Wyatt Earp, but they don't use his name. They change all the names and everything so that they're, overtly fictionalized, as opposed to like My Darling Clementine or something else that uses the names but doesn't really get the history right. So, and that's a very long episode, over 3 hours. Supposedly it was cut down from 5 hours. That's what I've been heard. That's
baby
what I've heard.
Jesus.
So apparently none of my stuff.
The longest you and I ever recorded, I'd have to double check to be sure, but I think the longest we ever did in terms of pure raw audio was our episode about the Searchers, because you did a big, the first half of it was just setting the stage with the history before we actually got into the movie. So there was a lot there, and maybe we cut it down to 3 hours and 45 minutes, but I'm getting old. 5-hour marathons, unless there's some sort of recreational substance involved, I don't know if I can record about any subject for 5 straight hours. It's a challenge.
Well, there might have been some recreational substances, I couldn't say, but I do know by the maybe about the 3 hour point, John Cribbs especially and Christopher Funderburg, I think they both wanted to go to bed, and I was like, no, let's keep going. We got more to talk about.
Absolutely, I hear you. Where's your spirit?
Yeah, come on now.
Well, today we're going to be talking about Anthony Mann, and I feel like if you like Westerns from the 50s, sooner or later, you're going to wrestle with the movies of Anthony Mann. And when I think of 1950s Westerns, I think of all the colors and big, bold CinemaScope and Technicolor and all that stuff. But the two movies today are Academy ratio, black and white. But what's interesting to me about these early Westerns by him, it's almost like he hasn't quite said farewell to film noir yet. And for people who don't know, Anthony Mann had different stages of his career, and he didn't exclusively work within these styles or genres, but he made a lot of crime films and film noir in the late 40s, made a lot of Westerns in the 50s, and then a lot of historical epics in the early 60s. But you can still see some leftovers or some echoes in the visual aesthetic of movies like T-Men and Raw Deal, and movies like The Furies and Winchester 73. And then once Winchester 73 was a hit, he was off. And pretty much every time he and Jimmy Stewart made a movie together, it would perform a little better than the one before. But what people don't remember is that Jimmy Stewart, people were skeptical about this pivot point in his career. But before we get into Jimmy Stewart and his screen persona and how he evolved so much in the 1950s, what do you know or like, or what interests you about Anthony Mann's early days? Does anything jump out at you from his unconventional upbringing or his time in the theater or his film noir? Then now is the time to set the stage.
Well, it's an interesting thing. I'm not like an expert on Anthony Mann's entire career, but you do see these stages where, you know, the film noir stuff leads into his westerns, and you have remnants of that, especially in the Furies and in the Devil's Doorway, and somewhat in Winchester 73. But by the time that he had made Winchester 73, he's like absolutely in the Western genre. I mean, there are some Westerns that you can choose as like, in terms of like, that's a prototypical Western. You know, you could choose Shane, you could choose Stagecoach, and Winchester 73 is one of those. Absolutely.
Yeah. Movies that define the Western. People always are trying to say, oh, this movie transcends the Western or reinvents the Western. And I always want to shake people and say, you know what? Sometimes Westerns are just Westerns and they just define the Western. And I feel like Winchester 73 is one of those movies.
Yeah, or sometimes the Western doesn't need to be transcended. You know, like maybe the standard studio uninspired Western needs to be transcended, but otherwise it's not I don't think it's a genre that you need to break out of.
I think those terms are cooked up by people who are like have an embarrassment of acknowledging or admitting that they like Westerns. I'm like, you know what? You are allowed to just say you like watching movies about cowboys. Doesn't mean, you know, you want to see them with their chaps off and that sort of thing, but you are allowed just to acknowledge cowboys are cool. As my stepdad, who was born in 1934, he grew up at a time where his parents would just drop him off at the movie theater, and he would watch like serials or shorts or whatever movies until they came and got him back. And sometimes he'd watch them several times in a row. But his whole life, he'd say like, Slim, let's watch a cowboy movie. He never even called them Westerns. They were just cowboy movies. And that was totally fun.
Yeah. And then as I mean, I think the high point of his Westerns is Winchester 73. I don't think any subsequent Western that he did is as good, but he did great Westerns afterwards.
Yeah, he made 10 in the 1950s. He made 19 movies between 1950 and 1960. And if you include 1960, 11 of those 19 movies were Westerns. But he also made like the Glenn Miller Story and things like that, like World War II movies. He was experimenting with a lot of different genres, but the Jimmy Stewart movies were very successful.
Yes. Yeah. Oh, yeah. He pumped stuff out, but at a very high quality. But even then, you do see, especially by the time you get to like Cimarron, you know, the remake of the old Best Picture winner. That one, he left that one, and it was taken over by somebody else. But and then Anthony Mann then started the stage of his career when he was doing like period epics, right? And in a way,
Fall of the Roman Empire.
Yeah, and in a way, Westerns are period epics, but you can kind of see, especially with Cimarron, where that is definitely more about. It's not the gritty sort of like contained crime stories that obviously his film noir stuff was, but then that he brought to his Westerns, that kind of seems to maybe get ironed out to get more towards this epic sort of storytelling. And whatever people think of that stage of his career,
and
I think that
he started on Spartacus before he got fired, or he and Kirk Douglas had a parting of the ways and Stanley Kubrick stepped in. But Anthony Mann almost did 3 giant historical epics in a row, but he definitely, and that was also, he was a studio player, and studios have trends and fads. And yeah, crime films were big in the late 40s, and Westerns were big in the 50s, and historical epics with their casts of thousands were big in the early 60s. So he definitely seemed to be riding a lot of different waves when they were gaining popularity.
Yeah, and then you kind of see sometimes like the Far Country and Bend of the River and stuff like those start to take on a little bit of a more epic feel to them, more of a journey or, something
And
bigger.
CinemaScope. I mean, as soon as it makes the jump to CinemaScope, the movies start looking and feeling quite different.
Yeah. And those are all great movies, but especially with the ones that he did just in 1950, they don't necessarily have that like epic feel, like I know Anthony Mann was a big fan of John Ford. He said that was one of his favorite directors, if not his favorite director, because of how he's told stories visually. And Anthony Mann does the same thing. But for different means, Anthony Mann's Westerns are not like poetic films. They don't have, outside of maybe Devil's Doorway and something else here or there, they're not like necessarily big comments on American history or anything like that. So they kind of, I think that the film noir aspect brings itself to that. But it is just funny that he later goes on to make these big epics, but his Westerns themselves are not really like that outside of like Cimarron, but you kind of see where it's like he gets into a genre and then other aspects of the genre start to take over, and then he gets to another one and he carries them over. So just like as the film noir and the ruthlessness and the crime elements and the revenge and the psychological aspects of these characters and everything, he takes that over into Westerns. Not that he's the first to do that, but that's kind of one of the things that makes his Westerns really stand out at the time. And then it's
people always
like
say he made psychological Westerns. I'm like, I mean, maybe it's like every movie's psychological to a degree, but like, I guess for me, I try not to get too hung up on whatever terminology people need to kind of like act as like the bait or the gateway into discussing these. If people are discussing Anthony Mann movies, awesome. Discuss them as Freudian or psychological, however you like. Or if you just want to enjoy them as cowboy movies, that's cool too. As long as people are watching them and discussing them, I just feel like Anthony Mann, and Jimmy Stewart talks about this in the commentary track for Winchester 73 about how even in the late 80s, he still felt like Anthony Mann wasn't getting his due. He just was getting overshadowed by a lot of other directors or a lot of his other peers. And I just want to do my own small part to reminding people that if you like great pairings of a director and a star, whether it's Ford and Wayne or Bedecker and Scott, in that same conversation is Stewart and Mann, because they made some good ones together.
Yeah, exactly. And so, but I guess what's interesting is what I'm saying is that his Westerns don't have that, for the most part, don't have that like epic historical grounding that then later his historical epics would have.
Totally.
I mean, his historical epics are similar, but they're not. It's not the same thing. You'd expect his Westerns to be more overblown. But it's just funny how he jumps from each genre, and every time he jumps from each one, he's kind of taking aspects of that one for the next one that he's doing.
Yeah.
But it's not necessarily fully bringing them to fruition in terms of the Westerns specifically.
Do you detect an influence of the classics on it? Because he had this very unconventional, unusual background where he grew up in San Diego, and I think it was like 1910 when he was born. I can't remember quite what year it was, but there's essentially a commune, and this commune was devoted to studying ancient Greek philosophy and theater and Shakespeare and basically anything that was old as balls. That's what they were into studying. But the families essentially had to give up the rights to their children. And at a certain point when he was like 4 or 5, due to his health, his father went back to Europe and his mother went with him. And he basically didn't see his parents for like 10 years. And they only came back to check on him when they heard about all sorts of strange ritualistic abuse that was going on in this unusual environment. But irrespective of how unusual the conditions were in which he grew up, he did have a deep reverence for the classics. And he had this great line at one point saying how you look at any great play from the Greeks, whether it's by Sophocles or if you're talking about King Lear by Shakespeare, you can set classic plays in the West and change the window dressing and they fit right in. There's something about the West that he just found very visceral and exciting. And he felt like it was a great place for these, very adversarial scenarios he liked cooking up.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's a whole later. That's a that's a very loaded thing that you just said there in regards to not only classics but also family, because his films are oftentimes, I mean, it's very obvious in the Furies, but Man of the West, Man from Laramie, and then Winchester 73, and a lot of his stuff is like about these like families, these fucked up sort of
that are always trying to kill each
yeah,
other.
yeah, and that's part of like one that could be just the way he was raised, just in terms of in this weird commune with his parents abandoning him and all that. But it's also the classics, like he brings in not only, for example, Winchester 73. Not only does he bring in patricide, but then it's also this whole Cain and Abel element,
He joked. He said
and
he likes patricide. He goes, any eye. Like he liked all the eyes, like putting the
yes.
eyes into westerns.
Yeah, exactly. So you have that in Winchester 73. He was obsessed with King Lear. And obviously the Furies is just led not only with these weird incestuous overtones, this electro complex that's being explored, but also just all this ancient myth and Greeks and all that stuff, but not in a way that it's done in a way that is it feels appropriate and like germane to the Western genre. It doesn't feel like something is being imposed on it or the genre is being stretched to that. It kind of fits in perfectly.
And
Maybe
if
the Furies feels
you
like it's
weren't
being a little
into
stretched.
classical theater, it's not going to be an impediment. Like, as soon as you mention King Lear, some people, oh, King Lear, I want to watch Akira Kurosawa's Ran, like his adaptation of King Lear. Like people love King Lear, but some people hear the word Billy Shakespeare and they're like, I'm running, screaming for cover. And so not to worry if you just want to watch really savage, mean people battling to the death. Anthony Mann's got you covered. He has some ne'er-do-wells in his movies that'll definitely keep you entertained.
Well, just even with these two films that we're talking about today, is that one really languages in that sort of thing. Like the Furies is, I mean, someone might be able to look at the Furies and actually be like, yeah, this is like overtly, Greek or classic or, but, and that's what makes that interesting. But he's also able to do something like Winchester 73, which in terms of form is very different from the Furies, which is, like straight up, if you want just like a really intense, fun action film, intense, fun Western that gives you all the indulgences, all the aesthetic pleasures, all the set pieces. You can't find a pure movie than Winchester 73.
And it's like in 92 minutes, hour and a half in and out, and it's a full meal.
Yes, exactly. But he's still like livening it up with that same sort of familial tragedy and whatever fucked up kind of strange old mythic qualities. It's not just like a B Western action film, but if you just want, it's not a B. In no way is it a B Western, but if you just love B Western action films, there's nothing about Winchester 73 that is going to put you off. If that's what you want, it's the perfect version of that. But it has all these other depths and layers that he doesn't weigh the movie down with. Does the Furies get weighed down with it? I don't think so. But that is a movie that is designed to be weighed down with that stuff.
It's designed to be more. Yeah, and if you like heavy, it will be very satisfying. But since we talked about Winchester 73 so much, maybe it's time to just play the original trailer, which sadly is a little bit in poor condition, but it'll just give everybody out there who's not seen the movie a taste of the flavor of the drama. So, for people who don't know, Jimmy Stewart was definitely making an overt attempt at reinventing himself at this point. He had started off in Hollywood in the late 30s, very successfully working with directors like George Cukor, Frank Capra, Ernst Lubitsch, making these dazzling, sparkling comedies of wit, love, and romance. And he was incredible. He even won a fucking Oscar for Philadelphia Story. He was doing great. And then he volunteered to serve in World War II, where he flew a lot of bombing missions, and he served with distinction. And he came back quite a changed man, and he was ready to kind of grow up into different material. But he struggled to kind of settle back into Hollywood and find his groove to the same degree he'd enjoyed in the late 30s. And movies like It's a Wonderful Life, while they're fondly regarded now, initially were the public was cool upon their initial reception. But he wanted to make some movies that would show off his range and would show that he had some other aspects. It's supposed to be like, oh yeah, God, gee, golly, wow, like, you know, that whole Mr. Smith goes to Washington persona. He was ready to spread his wings. But what's hilarious is now listening to this commentary track from 1989, all those decades later, even then he still will kind of revert back to that, like that golly gee kind of persona, even if he's trying to get away from it. But it's so sweet and so affectionate just getting to watch a movie alongside Jimmy Stewart when he's in his declining years. I strongly recommend people check it out, because he's basically sitting next to this giant film nerd. And at the end, he's like, oh, that was so much fun. Like, these laser discs are just wonderful. Like, he's like so amazed that you can like laser discs are a thing. But you tell me what's going on here. Like, are you a Jimmy Stewart fan in general? Are you just a big Winchester 73 fan? Or do you think he was successful in his goals and reinventing himself with this movie?
Oh, I think he's undoubtedly successful. I love Jimmy Stewart. I think everybody, I think. And I love his Westerns. And I think that, you know, he's not, I mean, that, oh, golly gee, kind of persona, I don't think at the time it might have maybe shocked people a little bit. I think now the whole, like, you know, his whole idea of who his persona is, the It's a Wonderful Life kind of guy, it's what I think it is what people expected. So I think they might be surprised by this series of Westerns. And he is he creates he on the outside it seems like he's maybe miscast in a certain way, but he creates a different type of Western hero, just in the sense that I don't want to say he creates a different one, but his persona with the material creates a character that you don't see often in Westerns. And he's not a John Wayne guy. He's not a Gary Cooper guy. He's not even a Randall Scott guy.
Or a Henry Fonda guy.
Yeah, those are all characters that kind of feel like they have things in control. Whether or not they have everything in control, they have themselves in control. So if there's a villain that's goading them or something, they're not going to blow up. They're going to be relaxed. That's one of the things that they that's one of their special powers, in a way, I guess you'd put it, that they have the ability to look at a situation and go, I'm not going to react now, right? And what Jimmy Stewart brings to it is a character that does react. It's not that he's like, obviously he's not just a guy who's just consistently angry. That's not Jimmy Stewart's character, but he's a character who will flip out on a second. Like, you know what I mean? He's the type of Western hero, and it's a weird, maybe even Western actor to even, you know, point to in relation to him. But one of the other guys that can do this, which is way later in the spaghetti Westerns, is Franco Nero. Because with Jimmy Stewart and Franco Nero, they can both play very cool and collected and everything, obviously. But you can also accept them as like flipping out, or you can also accept them as crying. You know, I can accept a Jimmy Stewart Western hero as crying, Not that he necessarily does that in his westerns. I can't remember one where he
Well,
does.
he shows a lot of like rage, pain, and fury when they are torturing him in The Man from Laramie and shoot through his hand. He's not like, crying like
Yeah.
a bitch or anything like that, but he is emotional and showing that he does have weaknesses. Yeah, and being tortured ain't fun.
Yeah, and just like not with like Django, but just like later Franco Nero movies, westerns, but movies in general. He's a tough guy and everything, and can kind of maybe do a little bit of a Clint Eastwood thing, but you also just accept him as like a very emotional person that's going to flip out and start, screaming or crying in a way that a John Wayne wouldn't. And so he brings that, but he also brings to those roles this idea of like we all kind of have an idea of Jimmy Stewart, and he is believable as these guys who are hardened and tough guys, but you don't necessarily think of Jimmy Stewart as a tough guy. But that's what he brings to the role, is that he has a history before being this person. When you're seeing something with Winchester 73, where he's ready to throw a guy, throw Dan Duryea like over the counter and do all this stuff, it's not because you look at him and go, that's a tough guy who can just do that, like you would with like a John Wayne or even like a Gary Cooper, who's more of a laid back guy. It's that he used to be Jimmy Stewart. Now he's this guy. Something's happened to him. That's what he brings to that role. That's what makes his characters somewhat unique in the Western genre. So,
and he put in the work. Apparently, when it came to writing and shooting, he said it was just a simple matter of just getting as much practice as possible. And he wanted to be convincing. Like he always said that when it came to all these personas you mentioned, he said John Wayne was the best cowboy, Henry Fonda was the best actor, but Jimmy Stewart, he brought his own unique qualities. One of the things he did is he was just more than happy to spend like an hour or two a day practicing how quickly he can draw or how he sits on the horse pie, which he rode for like 27 years across every single Western that he ever appeared in. And he wore that same hat over and over again, like for good luck. But he was putting in the hours and he was putting in the work to become believable. And I think he's incredible. And I think what he brings to the table that so many other actors do not, he has these heartfelt moments, whether he's talking about the value of friendship or just different things that he brings to the, or like his love and affection for his father that his brother murdered in the context of this movie. He can go there emotionally in ways that a lot of other actors can't. And I think there's that warmth of Jimmy Stewart, that the warmth that people responded to and loved in the late 30s and early 40s, it's still there, but it's just been tempered by his World War II experiences. So now he is like a legit veteran, a soldier. He's mature. He's an aging guy, but when he wants to, he can still tap into that those incredible qualities that made him a one-of-a-kind performer.
Yeah, when you let's say we look at like John Wayne and the Searchers or whatever. That's a guy who's like callous. He's a callous of a man, and just every once in a while, his like humanity or who he used to be peeks in. But it's hard to see that when you're looking at him, right? And with Jimmy Stewart, it's not that. You can see, even at his hardest, his most callous, even at his least emotional, you can see who this man was, and you can see that this is not what his natural state is. Where they go, John Wayne, you're almost like things just had to get to a point where he was this guy because this is his fullest form.
Born to violence. Yeah.
yes, exactly. But it's not quite the same with a Jimmy Stewart character, especially in a Western, So,
and because he's kind of a slender, slight guy, I do find it more interesting when he's getting to act like a total badass. Like even at the very end, when he's talking shit to his brother about how the old man always taught us to look after our ammo, but you wasted it and now you're short. He's convincing and believable. He's just convincing and believable in a different way. And I like how he can be a bad motherfucker without having to be the world's biggest badass, which is hard to do. It's just he has a very unusual quality. But whether you talk about this or Bend of the River or The Far Country or any of them, I love one. It's funny, like when people talk about Jimmy Stewart, they always think about late 30s, but really it's the Hitchcock movies and the Mann movies in the 1950s, which I think show his most interesting qualities. Like when you think about like Rear Window and Vertigo and this, and it's like, yeah, I think the Jimmy Stewart of the 1950s blows the Jimmy Stewart of the 30s out of the water, even though I love Lubitsch and I love Capra and I love George Cukor and all those movies, but I think he kept evolving as a performer and getting better.
Yeah, that is true. And And that is funny because, yeah, a big chunk of his most well-loved movies are him playing these darker roles. But you don't necessarily look back at Jimmy Stewart as an actor of dark roles, you know?
Yeah.
But,
Well, because he's just so warm. He is so instantly likable and lovable, and that's why he's one of the biggest stars of like the 1930s and not really 1940s, because he was away for a lot of it and struggled to readjust. But 1930s and 1940s, he's definitely one of the biggest stars you can ever get your hands on. So if I were to show a clip of Jimmy right now, I've got a few options for you that I can share. I can show the contest where they're actually competing for the rifle. I can show the shootout at the very end of the movie. I can show the scene about friendship, or I could show the scene where he and his buddy meet the Earps for the first time. Should we show the Earps, since you just recently tackled the Earps in a recent podcast?
yeah, we can. I mean, at some point I was going to get into a little bit of what historically inspired Winchester 73.
Then let me show a 20-second clip about the gun, and then you can get into the inspiration. So
okay.
Here we go. And I like how his brother has that little affectation. Whenever he raises the gun to his shoulder, he raises it at a 45-degree angle and kind of locks it in. But he really leans into that affectation over the course of the movie before he fires. But lay it on us. What inspired this flick, and how did they come up with this really interesting storytelling device of more or less following the rifle? Not always, not exclusively, but like the journey of a rifle from going from hand to hand over the course of a 92-minute movie.
The original idea for Winchester 73 came from Stuart Lake, and Stuart Lake was the guy who basically made Wyatt Earp famous. Wyatt Earp had infamy in his lifetime, but and at the end of his lifetime, he was kind of considered like a criminal and a con man and a bad person. And he spent the last years of his life trying to establish his reputation. And in that time, he did a series of interviews to Stuart Lake, who was like a sports writer or like a wrestling promoter guy, because he was recommended Wyatt Earp by Bat Masterson. So he interviewed Wyatt Earp, and then about a year after Wyatt Earp died, he released his book, Wyatt Earp, Frontier Marshal, and that became a huge hit and became widely influential. It's the basis for there's at least
Marshall.
There's two versions. There's two Frontier Marshal movies. One with Randolph Scott. That's the first one he actually used Wyatt Earp's name, and then that one was remade into My Darling Clementine. Later, there was a Rory Calhoun remake of My Darling Clementine when they changed all the names and the location, and that's called Powder River. But that became huge, and Stuart Lake. It inspired even movies that aren't Wyatt Earp movies. And Stuart Lake, he also had an idea, and that ended up becoming The Westerner, which was his concept was turned into a screenplay by Niven Bush, and we'll talk about him later.
Absolutely. Yeah,
but that is The Westerner, which
is this collection.
Yeah, and so The Westerner is a very loose take on Judge Roy Bean, and that's with Walter Brennan and Gary Cooper. So he had this concept for Winchester 73, and it was generally it was sort of like it is similar to the movie in terms of like you follow this Winchester rifle as it goes through different hands. And he was developing it for Fritz Lang, actually. So Fritz Lang had wanted to do a movie about Billy the Kid, and I think the Robert Taylor movie kind of had thrown that off. But he wanted to make another Western, so he was developing this with Stuart Lake. But after like paying Stuart Lake like $35,000, and after 4 months of writing, Stuart Lake had like 29 pages written, and it was all about just the history of the rifle. So they fired Stuart Lake, and Fritz Lang ended up leaving the project. And then Borden Chase got onto the project. Borden Chase is the guy who, he's worked on a ton of great movies, but his novel, his Red River novel, it became Red River, which was later
it's
rewritten.
a Saturday Evening Post story, and it famously had a horrible experience with Howard Hawks because at a certain point, Howard Hawks essentially dismissed him because he didn't like Borden Chase, presuming to have some sort of authorship over the story. And Hawks was like, make this guy go away. But Borden Chase was itching to work with a director that would, actually listen to what he had to say and, respect his wishes. And luckily, he and Mann did get to make a couple movies together.
Yes, yeah. And so Borden Chase's Red River was rewritten into a screenplay by Charles Schnee, and then he will come up later when we talk about the Furies.
Yeah.
But now, I've almost seen no one else talk about this, but I believe that there's a series of historical events that inspired Winchester 73. So the first thing is that there were actually the Winchester Company actually did have a 1 of 1,000 Winchester 73. I think in 1875 they started taking their Winchester 73 rifles, which were very popular, and they would test them out. They would test out a series of them, and they would take the ones that fired the best and everything and put them in the 1 of 1,000 group. And they sold for at the time between $80 and $100 when a regular Winchester 73 was being sold for $50.
Gotcha.
So that was, so that's where the whole thing, that this is a very particularly good version of a Winchester 73. That's kind of where that comes from. The most famous guy who ever bought one of these 1 of 1,000s was Granville Stewart, who was a very influential politician and frontiersman and all this other stuff. And him and his brother Tom, they had ordered 2 with their own names engraved and everything. And they would regularly participate in shooting contests where they would win rifles, not a Winchester 73, but like a fancy Sharps rifle or something else. So I think that the whole contest thing between these brothers and stuff maybe finds an origin there. Now, more specifically, the thing that really kind of reveals it. Now, in Stuart Lake's book, Frontier Marshal, he just has one section where he's talking about all these different outlaws that Wyatt Earp knew and the different things that they did. And he names 2 outlaws there. He names one, which is Henry Newton Brown. And then he names another one who is Dutch Henry Bourne. Okay.
So they got together and had a baby. And the character was born.
Yes. Well, when you actually read it and he's listing all these outlaws, he goes Dutch Henry and then Henry Brown. So even when you're reading it, it becomes Dutch Henry Brown.
Yeah.
So,
and he's an awesome villain, fantastic character. I mean, it's like he's total scum and a bully and a piece of shit and shoots people in the back. But you need a great adversary with which to lock horns with. And I love the idea you have a hero and a villain who were trained to shoot by the same guy. So you have an equal level of skill. So going into the final shootout, it's going to be fucking hell on wheels.
Yeah, well, all this stuff, like all this historical grounding, which I'm going to get into, is not anything that you would necessarily jump out to unless you really know like Old West history. And I don't even necessarily think it's something that I definitely don't think that Anthony Mann was aware of it. I don't know if Borden Chase was, but I think it's remnants of like Stuart Lake's ideas or who was the guy that did the treatment? Robert Richards or something like that. But beyond that, so Henry Newton Brown.
Yeah, Robert Richards. I'm seeing here a story by Stuart Lake, but screenplay by Borden Chase and Robert Richards.
Yeah, I think that it was basically Stuart Lake's ideas. Robert Richards put it into kind of a treatment, and I think Borden Chase is the one that really made it all come together. So in that, Henry Newton Brown, he ran with Billy the Kid. He was involved in the Battle of Lincoln, and the whole part where Dan Duryea, Waco Johnny Dean, and all those guys are getting burned out by the posse and stuff. That's very close to what happened to Billy the Kid during the Lincoln County War, and Henry Newton Brown was with him at that time. So you kind of see that. But this character of Henry Newton Brown, he, after running with Billy the Kid, breaking off with him in Tascosa, coming to Kansas, he went to Caldwell, Kansas, which was a very violent town, and they had like multiple marshals shot dead within that year. So they hired.
But this is why books and movies were made from these stories.
Yeah. So Henry Newton Brown, who was this outlaw, he's like, I'm going to go straight. I'm going to become a lawman. And so he does a good job. The town gives him a very special Winchester with a plate inscribed to him. It's a Winchester 73 too, and that's his name and everything on it. He shot a ne'er-do-well, and I think he shot a native, which maybe wasn't great, but everyone was excited. He's not only doing a great job, he's using the gun we gave him to kill these people. So he ends up marrying a lady who's like one of the better citizens in town, but he has no grub stake. So he's like, I got to do something. She's like from a good family. She has money. I have to pull my own weight. So he ends up going with two guys one named Ben Wheeler, and the other guy is named Wesley. Something John, maybe John Wesley is his name. I think I got it here somewhere. Let me look. Well, anyway, he goes with these two guys named Wesley and Wheeler, and then another guy named Smith. They go to rob a bank. It goes wrong. One of the tellers gets killed. He's got his Winchester with his name inscribed on it, and they all get caught. Everyone's surprised. Our good lawman is now robbed a bank with these two ne'er-do-wells, but they didn't know his history with Billy the Kid before that. So they try to make a run for it. Some of them get cut down by shotguns. One of the guys gets hanged. But before Henry Newton Brown was about to be hanged, he wrote to his wife, like, don't sell that fancy Winchester. Like, I'm sending this back to you. This is, don't sell this for anything. So when you watch Winchester 73, that's one of the stories. But when you watch it, you have this character, the one that is getting with what's her name? Sally. What's her name?
Shelley Winters' character?
Yeah, Shelley Winters.
Yeah, I just thought, yeah. I mean, Shelley Winters, who I always think of, Lolita or Place in the Sun and that sort of thing, but she's at her most desirable and fetching here in Winchester 73.
For whatever reason, she always played parts where like people don't really want her that much. There's a bunch of guys just always doing something else.
Place in the Sun and Lolita were very unkind to her.
Lolita, Night of the
They're
Hunter.
brilliant opportunities as an actor, but at least in Winchester 73, she gets to show that she's good on the piano and men want to bang her. And I love her comment about the making of the movies. Like, she's like, how come all these guys are so interested in this rifle and none of them seem to be all that interested in me? It's like, if I disappeared, would anybody notice? But anyway, I like her in this. I think she does a damn good job.
Yeah, well, so the Dutch Henry Band character, the two guys that he robs the bank with in the movie, they're both named Wesley and Wheeler. So it's clearly that bank robbery that happens at the end at Tascosa is clearly like pointing to who Henry Newton Brown was. And Dutch Henry Bourne was a famous horse thief. And he was called Dutch Henry because he was from Germany. And he was so famous as a horse thief that, if any stolen horse was eventually called like a Dutch Henry, like don't buy that one. That's a Dutch Henry, and Dutch Henry Bourne, he was involved in the Second Battle of Adobe Wells in 1874. And he was there. It was trade posts. These guys starting these trade posts in these areas of Indian country, and a bunch of Comanche led by Quanah Parker attacked it. And there were a bunch of people there, buffalo hunters. Bat Masterson was there, and there were different things that kind of are similar to the Indians attacking the cavalry in Winchester 73. And there were other battles that it seems based on. But the whole thing about like getting this shot, injuring their chief, and it makes them scatter and everything. The Battle of Adobe Walls had that. Quanah Parker was, in fact, injured, and it made the Comanche retreat. And there was also like this amazing rifle shot made by a guy named Ben Wheeler, who shot one of the Comanches from such a distance with a buffalo gun that it scared everyone else off. And Stuart Lake mentions that in Frontier Marshal. So you kind of see where like these stories between Dutch Henry Bourne and Henry Newton Brown influence the events that happen in the movie. So that whole Indian attack seems to be influenced by I.W. Wells. You have Bat Masterson, you have Wyatt Earp, you have Kansas, you have this bank robbery. All that stuff influences Winchester 73. So there's a lot of historical basis, but everything, the whole movie, everything, it goes off in its own direction. So you only can kind of find vestigial remnants of what their actual history is. But I think it's interesting. I don't think anyone else has ever pointed out the actual history behind Winchester 73. I don't even think Anthony Mann was aware of it.
Fair enough.
Anyway, I got that out of the way. So I'll take a breath.
You've had your historical inspiration enema, and
yes, exactly.
Everybody now has heard it here first, or at least heard all these different pieces assembled here first. Well, let's get into what makes the movie work and what makes it just so goddamn entertaining. Because I feel like, first and foremost, above anything else, Winchester 73 is just a fucking blast to watch. So many incredible characters, so much incredible dialogue, awe-inspiring black and white photography. And the great Bill Daniels shot this, who also shot Eric von Stroheim's Greed. And you can really get the sense that Anthony Mann was learning from the great silent film pioneers. He talks about one of his favorite directors being F.W. Murnau. And it's like, oh, yeah. Like, if you're a director in 1950, the people you grew up watching were probably all great silent filmmakers with a great command of the visual style. And obviously, his time spent with photographer John Alton shooting all that film noir. He knew what the hell he was doing when it came to great visual storytelling. But this is one of those rare movies where there's no like string coming out of it. You can kind of tug on like, oh, this kind of sucks or that kind of sucks. The cast is incredible. The dialogue's incredible. Everything about the movie is just kick ass from start to finish. Am I overlooking any flaws here? Am I being too complimentary? But I feel like it's this is one of those endlessly rewatchable movies where, much like the gun that they're competing for in the big shootout, the tournament, it just came out perfect. It's about 1 in 1,000 movie.
I honestly don't think you're overlooking much. I think that Winchester 73 is like, it's up there as one of the perfect Westerns. I mean, it's very close to perfect. I honestly really think the biggest imperfection, the most glaring one that, unless you're, the most glaring one is Rock Hudson as the native.
Yeah, all right, good call. Rock Hudson, obviously a very fine actor, but pretty wooden as the young buck who's trying to assert himself. This is all, the movie takes place after the massacre of Custer's forces, and so everybody's terrified about bumping into the indigenous folks. So that's part of like the backdrop, and everybody, especially the villains of the movie, are worried about traveling around with like guns in their hands, which leads to maybe my favorite scene of the movie when they go to this saloon and end up getting just taken for every penny they've got by John McIntyre. And John McIntyre is one of those great character actors in this period where, whether he was popping up in The Asphalt Jungle for John Huston or a movie like this, he's just so cool and so badass, and it's such a great, interesting performance. But it's almost like a great little short film watching these outlaws trying and failing to earn enough money, gambling with him to buy some fucking guns, and they keep losing. And once again, I'm spiraling and going in different directions. But every scene that you bump into becomes like its own great little short film before you move on to the next little novella within the overall construction.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely true. And just historically, just as a quick footnote, that whole a battle of Adobe Walls was because of kind of these crooked trade post owners that were setting up stuff on Indian land, and they had kind of recognized that as a threat. So
selling repeaters to the locals, and suddenly they were much more dangerous in combat.
Yeah, exactly. So, but no, you're right in the sense that what makes Winchester 73 so interesting is that it is it feels like a series of short films. It feels, I mean, I often call it like one of those like prototypical westerns, like Stagecoach and like a few others that uh like they almost like hit every possible plot of a western, whether it's revenge or the cavalry and an Indian attack, or it has the card game, with the dead man's hand or the shooting
Although apparently that's a
contest.
historical inaccuracy in the movie. The term "dead man's hand" had not yet been invented because that was the hand of cards that Wild Bill Hickok had, but he would have been shot historically after the events of this movie. And so that's one of the random little bits of trivia that I've stumbled across in my research that I somehow managed to just pull out of my ass.
Yeah. Well, that comes up a lot, and there were concepts of a dead man's hand before Wild Bill Hickok. So just the phrase wouldn't be anachronistic, but I think the ace,
Cards.
the ace is back with the eights specifically. Supposedly comes from Wild Bill's hand. We don't actually know what his hand was, but there were other versions of the dead man's hand before the Wild Bill Hickok one. But yeah, westerns are usually referring to that one, and half the time they refer to it. I mean, like I know, like Stagecoach also refers to it. There's a lot of westerns that refer to a dead man's hand, and probably about half of them are pre Wild Bill Hickok's murder. So,
well, another very minor historical inaccuracy is the age of Wyatt Earp in this movie. However, Wyatt Earp is so good in this, and his brother Virgil's so good. I don't care. So here's a little taste of when Jimmy Stewart and his partner in crime bump into the Earps for the first time. In any case, there's more to that clip, but I love that interpretation of the two characters. And once again, like the beginning of the movie, it does feel like just a cool short movie where these two guys who have a blood feud have rolled into town. We're not quite sure yet why they're feuding, but they get stripped of their weapons. And then, of course, the first saloon they go to, they bump into each other and they reach for nothing. And so the tension is there from the word go. And I feel like the movie really hits the ground running with this epic contest.
yeah, no, that stuff's brilliant. Them wanting to pull guns on each other, and they don't have their guns because they've checked them in. The Yeah, like you're saying, the Wyatt Earp character in the movie is not accurate. Obviously, that's something that Stuart Lake was bringing to it. The thing about Wyatt Earp is he was never a marshal. He was always like a deputy marshal or whatever. He was never the lead marshal or the lead sheriff or whatever in a town. Uh, he was always under somebody else. So that's one thing. And at this time, yeah. So the first thing is in Dodge City at this time, no, Wyatt Earp would not be the main lawman. The other thing is, no, he wouldn't
He'd
be
been like
that old.
27 or something. Right?
Yeah, he would have been in his 20s. And Will Geary even himself was like, felt he was miscast. But,
But he's great. I love the way he portrays the character.
Oh, yeah, exactly. And so me as a history guy, of course, I'm like, okay, that's not right, but history be damned. It works. The reason it works there's a lot of different functional reason it works outside of just getting us like a Wild West hero cameo. The first thing is that you want to show that Jimmy Stewart's character he's not he's not fully on the side of the law. Somebody who comes asks him to check his guns, you're not going to check my guns. He's determined. So you're kind of getting the feeling he's got something on his mind. He has something to do, right? And this old guy is asking him to check his guns, and he's willing to be like, no, I'm not going to do that. And then he says his name is Wyatt Earp. So the function is like, oh yeah, Wyatt Earp, that name has stuff behind it. So that if your hero backs down, you go, okay, that's Wyatt Earp. But by portraying him as like this old avuncular sort of character, almost grandpa-like, and his brothers, it's kind of these hicks and stuff, which is not who Wyatt Earp was or who his brothers were. But
yeah, I just like the line. He's like, "You're gonna have this room so cluttered up with 6 guns, a man won't have room to spit." It's like, all right, yeah, just a little colorful phrase.
Well, the thing is, you don't want that Wyatt Earp character to be tough. You don't want a tough guy because you don't want him to you don't want Jimmy Stewart's character to be backing down because the Wyatt Earp character is doing anything. You want it just be the name. And he goes, well, I better not mess with him. We don't know what he can do, so we're just not even going to bother with it. So you kind of need to have a famous character's name, but at the same time, you can't make him too tough, or because then you go, why am I not watching the Wyatt Earp movie,
Yeah,
right?
exactly. Yeah.
So by making him like this old dork guy, you're like, well, now me personally, yes, I want to watch that movie where this old avuncular guy is trying to keep a town in order because that's just me. But everyone else, you're like, okay, no, I want to still follow Jimmy Stewart. I don't want to follow this kind of grandpa like Wyatt Earp character. So it's like one of those things where it's like it uses enough of the audience's knowledge of history to define the Jimmy Stewart character, so that we know where he stands and we know that he's willing to pull a gun, but he's not a guy who's gonna back down Wyatt Earp. But at the same time, you can't have somebody intimidate him on his aura or his essence. The name itself is what does it. So it's one of those things where it's like, yeah, history and mythology, they work together. You can use history for your own means. I'm a history guy, but it's okay if a movie uses it in a way that actually seems to have purpose. So,
and also at this point in the movie, we have not yet seen how good Jimmy Stewart's character is with a gun. And it's during the contest when it's like there's 3 shots dead center. They move the target back 25 yards, 3 shots dead center. Then, of course, they're shooting coins out of the air and then shooting through rings and stamps and all this stuff. And at some point, you realize, oh, my God, like this guy is really good with a gun. And then we learn furthermore, deeper into the movie, about his war experiences and how he did fight in the Civil War. He fought on the side of the South. And some of my favorite scenes of the movie by far, when I think it's the actor's name,
J.C.
Flippin. Yeah, J.C. Flippin, who was great in movies like The Killing for Stanley Kubrick. But he's talking about, oh, I wish we'd had you boys with us at Bull Run. Like, we might not have run so much. And I love when he's talking about the Southern boys and how they didn't know when they were licked. And Jimmy Stewart's just kind of smiling and showing those classic Jimmy Stewart kind of mannerisms. And then finally, when they're having their parting in the way, he's like, oh, by the way, we were there with you at Bull Run. We were just on the other side. But I feel like that's when we're getting to see a unique blend of Jimmy Stewart's likability, but also his own war experiences in World War II are starting to shine through. And I feel like you're seeing his own experiences informing the character, but obviously he's not making a movie about his own experiences. And so, yeah, it's like the character Jimmy Stewart's portraying, he gets increasingly interesting over the course of the movie. And yeah, I think it's one of the finest roles that he ever played. And he disappears for like half the movie. But every time you've got him, you love every moment that you have with him.
Yeah, it's a movie that is like, it's like it's a funny thing because like at the center of it is this, I wouldn't want to say like a contrivance, but it's like what?
It's just a hook. There's a good hook at the center.
It's a hook, or it's like a what do you call those? High concept, almost high concept in a way, where it's like, oh, we follow a gun the whole time. It's right. It's like whatever. It's like the One Ring or whatever. It's corrupting thing, or everyone must want it.
I think you might be the first person to link Winchester 73 and Fellowship of the Ring or Lord of the Rings, but that might be a double feature that I need to put together at some point.
But it is like one of those things, and so it feels on that level. It feels gimmicky. It feels like the kind of storytelling that you don't like, or even the way you were mentioning, like it feels like you're following a lot of short stories or something. But what makes it work so well, why I think it's one of the best Westerns, I would probably put it in top 10 Westerns, is because it is atypical because it has that device, but that device allows it to be not only typical but prototypical, because that device allows Anthony Mann, and he said this, he said that Winchester 73 is his favorite of his Westerns. And he said it because it takes the whole genre and like summarizes it. So it's like this whole like high concept idea of the movie allows you to hit all these aspects of the Western genre. And and I think I mentioned it on the other episode that we had done on this way back
Oh, yeah, but
when.
you forgot to mention Wrong Reel 633, which we recorded in February of 2023, so 2.5 years ago. If you want to if you need just more Winchester 73 in your life, I will link that podcast in the description below.
Yeah, so this one, the rifle is the vehicle that allows us to meet all these characters and all these plots, right? And Stagecoach itself was, it has basis in older literature and stuff, but there's something about it that's a little bit like Grand Hotel. It is kind of bringing in the gambler, the corrupt bank guy, the drummer, the prostitute, the outlaw, all these different guys, the lawman, all these characters, all these standard Western characters, even before Stagecoach,
The classic
and it brings them all together. And so they both have a vehicle. In Winchester 73, the vehicle is the Winchester rifle that allows it to be this kind of, you tour the whole genre and allows it to be like one of these great like standard westerns. You know what I mean? And Stagecoach obviously is viewed that way. And in Stagecoach, the vehicle for doing that is a literal vehicle. It is a stagecoach, So it's like the rifle and the Stagecoach allows you to do these things. And you can see where Shelley Winter's prostitute character is very much
Claire Trevor. Yeah, Claire Trevor's running around town when we first see her in Stagecoach, and Shelley Winters. She's not even like that much of like a like a working girl. It just seems like because she plays the piano and is unmarried, or that they're running around town, it seems like they're a little harsh to her early on, or maybe they are just implying. Maybe they didn't want to go all the way there, but I feel like Claire Trevor's character is much more blatantly, a working girl, a professional in Stagecoach. But maybe I'm just maybe by the time they got to 1950, they didn't want to sully Shelley Winter's reputation quite so severely.
I think by that point, the showgirl and the prostitute had basically everyone kind of knew without them laying it on. In the actual Old West, that wouldn't necessarily be the case. There was, at least a lot of places, the showgirls and the prostitutes were separated. They were delineated. But
I'll say this, though. I think Shelley Winters has the edge on Claire Trevor in terms of sexiness. Late deep into the movie, when she's playing the piano, when Jimmy Stewart catches back up with her, the way she's kind of turning her head and like talking to Dan Duryea beforehand, and that kind of sly smile on her face. Shelley Winters, I never really thought of her in a sexual fashion prior to this movie, but after seeing Winchester 73, I saw her in a different light.
Yeah, and she has that famous quote, like, I had no idea about that movie. Here's me, I'm this fine woman, and everyone else is after this damn rifle. Like I couldn't understand it in any way. But you see that, and it opens up with that, and so it is an interesting. And Jimmy Stewart's character is very much like the Ringo Kid. He's out to get his revenge, and so you see a lot of linkage there. But like I said, like John Ford and Anthony Mann are very similar because of how they tell the story visually, how they weren't trying to rely on editing. They were trying to get it in there. John Ford was trying to infuse his imagery, not only in terms of storytelling, but with also poetry. And Anthony Mann is less interested in that. So you can kind of see where they're different artists, but you see the efficiency in the storytelling and the beauty of the storytelling. And like the way Winchester 73 opens, like Anthony Mann didn't want to cut unless he had to, but it wasn't because he was trying to have these big show-offy long takes, but it's just because why am I cutting? Why would I cut if the storytelling's working? And you kind of see that when they first open up on like the rifle in the display case, and so you're opening up on like the engraving and the kids looking at it and their father's looking at it, and then it zooms out, and then you have Jimmy Stewart and High Spade coming into town, and then in the background, this is all unbroken. In the background, you see the stagecoach pulling up, And then the scene cuts when they go to like the stable boy who's going to put their horses up. But then immediately after that cut, we move into the Wyatt Earp character, kicking out Shelley Winter's character, right? So, but it's all told in one shot up to that point, but not in a way where you're going like, wow, what a great shot. It's really making,
Yeah, it's not calling attention to itself. It's just the most efficient way to tell the story, and it's done beautifully.
Yeah, and so you're watching it, and so if you're watching it not thinking about what's coming next, you're just seeing a stagecoach in the background. It's just background noise. It's just making everything feel more alive. But then we go and we're like, oh no, the stagecoach is here to pick them up. There's that kind of visual elegance and everything that I not only do I think that Mann is taking from Murnau, and John Ford himself was a big fan of Murnau. I posted about how much he loved Sunrise and everything. But also from Ford, but moving it in a different direction. So that's what makes him a unique artist. He learns from Ford, but he does his own thing. He's not just somebody who's trying to, he's not eating John Ford scraps.
Totally. Well, as great as his visuals are, he also has some really great dialogue and moving passages. So I just want to share this one scene with Jimmy talking about the nature of friendship. And that's why he's Jimmy Stewart. He can sell a line like that. Like some people might try to wink at the audience, or maybe they couldn't make it sound so earnest. Jimmy Stewart's definitely one of the most earnest and sincere actors who ever worked in the movie biz.
Oh, for sure. When John Ford is making My Darling Clementine, Henry Fonda was trying to get him to cast Jimmy Stewart as Doc Holliday.
Oh, that would have worked.
And John Ford was like, I just can't. He couldn't see it, even after World War II. I can't see him as the killer. This character, and I think it wasn't until these that John Ford was like, I kind of.
He needed other filmmakers to show off how good actors can be. Like even after, it wasn't even until fucking Red River when he saw what Howard Hawks did with John Wayne. He's like, I didn't even know the son of a bitch could act. Or at least that's how the story goes. Who knows if that was the case or not? But he would let other directors show off hidden qualities of actors that before kind of using them in a new way.
Yeah, exactly. It's also he did the same thing with Harry Carey Jr. He's like introducing in his version of Three Godfathers. It's like, well, he was already in Pursuit. He was already in Red River. So it's like I want to take a risk on this guy, but I got to see if he's good on screen even slightly before I really will pull the trigger. So and then take credit afterwards, right?
Totally.
But yeah, and the movie, I mean, even beyond just that, the movie, like Millard Mitchell's obviously great, Steve McNally, Dan Duryea, and then you have these
Dan Duryea is always good. He is such a brilliant fucking villain, and like nobody's does a better job of convincing you like he's the guy who's gonna steal your girlfriend then and there. If he finds her to be attractive, he's gonna take your gun. He's going to take your girlfriend. He's going to take it all if he wants it.
Yeah, well, he might take your life. Even if your girlfriend's not into it, he might kill you and take your hostage. So you don't know. But and on that commentary, which is great, it's also on the old DVD, I think. The Jimmy Stewart commentary.
Yeah, it's been around since 1989. It's been around for a long time, and I think they just keep reusing it.
Yeah. Well, if anyone can't. You were kind enough to get both of the criterions for me for this episode.
You've given me so many great videos and podcasts over the years. The least I can do is gift you some kick-ass collector's items from time to time. And I feel like Criterion, for whatever reason, I never would have thought that like this like New York company would be so devoted to Westerns. Every like month or two, they put out a good one, whether it's McCabe and Mrs. Miller or whatever. But every once in a while, they just do or Red River. They do a fantastic job of preserving the really big, kind of landmark Westerns.
Well, I think any company that wants to talk about movies can't avoid it. But yeah, you were kind enough to send them, and I was shameless enough to accept them, and I will continue to.
I'll do. Yeah, as long as you keep recording videos with me, I'll keep them coming. But one thing I did want to talk about from the commentary that I found interesting with Jimmy Stewart. First and foremost, he said he was asked if Hitchcock ever mentioned the Anthony Mann westerns, and Stewart was like, "Nope, not once." I don't even know if he saw them, but Hitchcock was not interested in discussing westerns with Jimmy Stewart. Made an interesting comment about the changes in the studio system, because famously Jimmy Stewart at this time was kind of a trendsetter in terms of taking very little money up front in exchange for back-end participation. This idea was cooked up by Lew Wasserman. Lew Wasserman famously eventually would run MCA Universal. He was friggin' Ronald Reagan's agent at one point. I mean, he was a very powerful man. But in the commentary, Jimmy Stewart was kind of not getting nostalgic, but he said one advantage, he says it's important to learn from history. One advantage of the contract system and the studio system was that actors stayed busy. You went to work every day at 8. And whether you're shooting or not, you were taking voice lessons or doing screen tests, or you were in the gym, or you were practicing your craft, but you were always busy, always practicing. And he said actors just got better and better and better, because they were treated like it was almost like a 9-to-5 job. You go to the studio in the morning and you go home in the evening. And so it's a very expensive system, keeping a bunch of actors under contract. So he understands why it eventually had to kind of fold in. But I found it ironic that the actor who's most famous for kind of tearing down that model was talking about the advantages of it all those decades later. But obviously he very successfully took advantage of the studio system, as well as the new, more entrepreneurial approach in the 1950s. And yeah, he made a shitload of money. He had so many hits in the 50s, even movies like Glenn Miller's Story, which people never even talk about now, but these massive box office earners. And he was, of course, a partner on these movies. So yeah, Jimmy Stewart did just fine in the 1950s.
And there had been, like, Gregory Peck had done something similar with Points, and I think Abbott and Costello, but never to that level. And not only Jimmy Stewart, but I was thinking about this too, similar to you. I was thinking about, like, Lew Wasserman, like, negotiating this deal that in many ways, like you're saying, kind of started the end of, the studio system kind of controlling these actors and everything. So like, by the time Lew Wasserman had become the head of, like, Universal or whatever, was he, like, regretting the deal he got for Jimmy Stewart? Was he like,
I don't know,
no,
man.
I really regret having put this in place.
I mean, you think about it, the studio system, people talk about it so fondly. It didn't actually last that long. Like, the studio system, as we understand it, it really was a phenomenon of, like, the 1920s and the 1930s and the 1940s. And then they got that classic kind of assembly line. The moment the studios started being bought up by larger companies, that was the end of the studio system, because prior to that, they controlled their own destinies. But the moment you're just one company on a very large balance sheet, or part of a very large portfolio of companies under one big umbrella, well, then you're no longer the studio system. And so that for me was the end. Like, because you start seeing in the logos at a certain point, you have the studio logo, but it's like a company owned by, like, Paramount became a Gulf and Western company. Like, all right, so is it a Paramount movie or is it a Gulf and Western movie? And at a certain point, the studios sadly just all got gobbled up.
Yeah, well, it's one of those things where you go, as someone who's not part of any of these industries, you look at them and you go, well, this aspect of it was superior, but this, like, you had a whole system that could support you, but at the same time, if you were trying to do anything that would buck that, that would be, you'd either be crushed or you'd have to be completely outside of that system. But then when you have these people that are making all these movies outside of that system, they, but that itself can't sustain itself. It's just one of those things where,
they're always, it's always, the grass is always greener, whichever approach you choose. But what I like about the studio system is how you definitely had individuals with a strong sense of personal taste that were kind of dictating the direction, sometimes successfully, sometimes not. But whether you're talking about Harry Cohn or Louis B. Mayer or, like, Jack Warner, but there were certain, like, titans that had a certain taste for certain kinds of movies, and their studios were in service of that taste and that vision. And when those guys got a little older and their tastes were no longer in fashion, well, then the studio started to struggle. Like Jack Warner in the 30s was really good at making kick-ass gangster movies, but at a certain point, you can't just keep making James Cagney gangster movies until the end of time. People will get sick of them, and you have to be able to evolve and change. And so, yeah, I'm just glad that, it existed while it did. We got all these amazing movies, but time moves on, and time waits for no man, and we're always in a process of evolution. Or in the case of the 2025, sometimes devolution, but always changing one way or another.
Yeah, well, I just, even as a fan of westerns, like that era of like the 50s westerns, which are the one which is the most celebrated. That is an era where I numerically probably the most great westerns have come out of that era.
Someone says 100 westerns came out in 1950. That can't possibly be true, but the historian interviewing Stewart on the commentary track says in 1950, across all the studios, 100 theatrical. I mean, maybe he's talking about like one-reelers and two-reelers, but yeah, they made a lot of westerns. Like, people complain about too many superhero movies and shows being made today. It's nothing on how many westerns are being cranked out in the 50s and early 60s. They were in vogue.
Well, yeah. So I can look at that time and go, like, they were making so many westerns, and so many great westerns are coming out. But I don't necessarily like long for that, because then there were great westerns that came out not only before that had developed, but there were great westerns that came out after that. And so, my favorite westerns might not exist in that system, whether it's The Wild Bunch, whether it's Pat Garrett, Billy the Kid, whether it's McCabe and Mrs. Miller. They couldn't exist in that system. But having said that, that system has also pumped out probably the most great westerns, So it's one of those things where it's like you will have these sort of landmark.
Studios made prestige westerns, and they made their B westerns. Like, some of the Anthony Mann westerns were considered prestige westerns. Big budget, glamorous, lots of movie stars, and others were designed to be on the bottom half of a double bill and that sort of thing. So, like, people now just think of like, oh, they made westerns, but there were like different categories of western within the western genre, depending upon which studio, whether it was Universal or Paramount, that they might be choosing to emphasize.
It's like one of those things. It's one of those things where it's like, you live with your parents, you complain the whole time, you have no freedom. Then you get out to the real world, you can do what you want, everything, and that there's something great about that. But then you long for the days when your parents took care of your meals and did this, or So whether or not, if you're someone who likes 70s cinema, or you like the stuff where the system started to fall apart, like, I get that, but the system itself, and it turned out a bunch of crap. But when I look back, especially with westerns, I go, well, I think they were making better movies back then. But a huge chunk of my favorite movies are made in that time when they weren't under that, under that yoke. So, it's, I don't have nostalgia for any of it, or I have limited nostalgia for all of it. Maybe is a better way to say.
Fair enough. Well, any final words about Winchester 73 before we move on to the second half of our double bill?
I mean, any final words? No final words, but a ton of other words.
Yeah.
A ton of other words I could say about it. I would put it in the top 10 westerns, not because I think it has depth or poetry, or that it actually says any bigger thing about the genre. And also, I reject the ideas that it was like like in that commentary that you're talking about, he's like, people say this is the first western with complex characters, or it's like, well, no, honestly not. And when I look at Winchester 73, it has a character who is maybe tortured and wants revenge and all this other stuff. But there's really, honestly, nothing about it that I would say it's new in terms of wanting, like I've already mentioned, Stagecoach. We already have a character who wants revenge. He gets his revenge in the end, and he gets away with it, right? Yeah. And westerns have been doing those types of tortured characters. The man who had this, he was going this way, and then something happened, and now he's this outlaw, or this guy who's bent on vengeance. That's from the silent era. That's from before the silent era. So that kind of stuff, when they try to say this is like the first in the psychological westerns, the first in the gritty westerns, I reject that. I reject that not only because we had just a few years before that, we had Red River, and it cops out at the end, and maybe that's because there was a writer there, and maybe that writer worked on the Furies, but we'll talk about it in a second. But you can't, outside of that ending, the interpersonal dynamics of what's going on in Red River is way more calling this genre into question, calling Manifest Destiny into question, calling all these things into question, more so than what Winchester 73 does. That's not what makes it great. What makes it great is that it has these elements, and Anthony Mann is not interested in wasting time. It's that all those elements are there, and they are uh, he puts them down. He presents them in the most direct, efficient, effective way, and he does every element of the movie, of the whole genre, in that way. That's what makes it stand out. It's that he has such control of the material. It's not that the material itself, and when I'm saying that,
Yeah,
it's
like
also
straightforward, but done to perfection. It's like you can make a cheeseburger like you're at some crummy fast food joint, or you can make the best goddamn cheeseburger ever made. And yeah, Winchester 73, as I said before, it's like that one rifle in 1,000. It just came out perfect.
Exactly. Yes, that's a good way to put it. That is a good way to put it. But it's also has that benefit of having a lot of westerns that came before it that it can look to and everything, and can build on. And also, for me, it's less of what it's bringing to the western and more so what it's discarding. It's like, we don't need this. We don't need this amount of exposition. We don't need a big romance between the hero and this gal. It's only going to be kind of hinted at and building, but it's even then not developed. But it's undeveloped in a way that works because the narrative itself doesn't lend itself to developing that. That's why the movie is good. It's not what it's bringing to the Western genre, and more so what it's bringing to that kind of storytelling, and not bringing to it what's discarding from that kind of storytelling. That's what I think it makes it special. So, Winchester 73, one of the great westerns.
Hell yeah. Well, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to tease the next flick on deck, the Furies. And instead of playing my usual wrong reel intermission pee break with my Shadowrun music, instead, I have found a trailer for the Furies, which is the exact same running time. So here's the trailer to the Furies. We'll be back in 2 minutes and 17 seconds.
Drama as vast and spectacular as the sweeping ranges and towering crags of the lawless empire that spawned it, the Furies. And to film this greatest of all novels by Niven Bush, who wrote Duel in the Sun, producer Hal Wallace has assembled a superlative cast of dramatic stars. Barbara Stanwyck, Wendell Corey, Walter Houston in his greatest role.
You stop telling lies about me, and I'll stop telling the truth about you.
I've heard that one before. Now get. I killed your father in fair fight, and I'd be pleased to do as much for you.
Mr. Darrow, sir. This is our dance, I believe, sir.
Told you I didn't want legal Tangerect. Didn't want to take on the Furies. That's all I need. Word to get back to your father. You've been here. I'm brazen enough to know that.
Conflict that flames across the dark domain of the Furies as the girl who ruled it fights to dominate 3 strong men and the woman who threatened her empire.
And my dear, please remember, you will always be welcome at the Furies. There will always be a room for you, won't there, Temple?
Ah! Do you want me to beg? Do you want me on my knees to you for his life?
I'd hang him anyway.
It's me you should have hung. Take a good long look at me, T.C. You won't see me again until the day I take your world away from you.
Alrighty, let me go back to the proper full screen, and we'll just put this as the background. Well, you have read the novel. I've not. I read a bit last night of the beginning, and of the end just to get a flavor or a taste or an idea of what the style of the source material was. But this movie, if I have my facts correct, I found some conflicting stories. This was shot before Winchester 73, but was released a few weeks after. In any case, we have Walter Houston, Barbara Stanwyck, Anthony Mann, I think Franz Waxman doing the score. Lay it on us. Where do you want to begin? People call this the Freudian Western, the psychological Western, but you could call it the Greek classical Western. You could call it a bunch of different things. You could call it the incest Western, the revenge Western. It's got a lot of things going on. Where do you want to start? Do you want to just give us some kind of your pitch or your summary or your impressions of the novel, since it's fresh on your brain?
Okay, yeah. Well, sure. So, yeah, the novel was written a few years before the film, and it was by Niven Bush, who was a screenwriter and novelist, and he wrote the script for Postman Always Rings Twice.
Adapted from James M. Cain.
Yes, yeah, he did that adaptation, and then he wrote the script for The Westerner. So that was based on an idea by Stuart Lake, who we've mentioned with Winchester 73. But he'd basically written the script based on Stuart Lake's idea. And after that, he was like, I could write a better Western. And, Westerns are always kind of like they shoehorn a lady into it. It's like, it's a woman between like these two guys or something. And he was sort of tired of that. So he said, I'm going to do something different. And then he ended up writing the novel, Duel in the Sun. And that was made into the movie. I haven't read the novel, so I couldn't say I enjoyed the movie Duel in the Sun, but it's
David S. Selznick at his most unhinged and over the top. Like, David S. Selznick was not known for subtlety, but if you want to see scenes where like 10,000 people on horseback are riding into these confrontations, yeah, it's David O. Selznick's great sense of fun. And it has a great climax. I'm not the world's biggest enthusiast for Duel in the Sun, although I do love the ending with Gregory Peck and these lovers shooting each other and loving each other. And yeah, it's very, very. Scorsese has a famous story where he talks about how his mother had heard that the Legion of Decency had put that movie on the blacklist. So out of like intellectual curiosity, she took her son to see it to find out what the Legion of Decency was all coming unspooled about. And so anyway, Scorsese at like age 5 was totally traumatized by Duel in the Sun, but he fell in love with Westerns.
Yeah, I like Duel in the Sun, but I also know I know what it is. It's like it's Selznick trying to do like a Western Gone with the Wind and a very horny.
And long story short, it was not a recreation of Gone with the Wind in terms of its popularity.
No, not quite. But and then Niven Bush had also he like Anthony Mann, he was something of like he was at least known for being like a film noir guy, like with Postman Always Rings Twice, his adaptation. And then he also wrote the screenplay for Pursued, which is very much like
Raoul Walsh's killer film noir Western, which is fucking rocks. If you like Robert Mitchum, definitely check it out.
Yeah. So then he ended up writing this one, and the novel's great. I love the novel. He did not do the adaptation for the film. It was done by Charles Schnee. And Charles Schnee was the guy who adapted Red River for Howard Hawks after Howard Hawks, like you said, had fired Warden Chase because he was
It's like, why does this writer keeps giving me ideas for the story? Like, who does he think he is?
Yeah, exactly. Now, I don't know who's to blame for the terrible ending of Red River. I don't know if that was Schnee being forced by Hawks or what. I'm going to not blame Borden Chase because his novel doesn't end that way. But I do also know that a lot of people have issues with the adaptation for the Furies, especially near the ending. And they think that they kind of have similar complaints in the way that it sets up kind of these villainous characters and then sort of tries to venerate
in the last
them.
like 2 minutes, it tries to soften them, and it feels really inauthentic. Like the very end of the movie, jumping ahead, obviously, but TC is burning all the TCs, all the money. And Barbara Stanwyck has this moment where suddenly she says, like, let it be a three-way partnership. And you're like, where did that come from? All you've been talking about is like murder and revenge and taking everything away from him the entire movie. And now suddenly in the last second, you decide you want a reconciliation so you can have like a sweet ending. Yeah. That moment where she says that because like she and her husband to be are so ruthless and so just such savages. It just comes across as like a last minute switch that they don't earn dramatically, but I like everything leading up to that very much.
Yeah, and the novel has something of a similar problem, but in a different way. We can get into that. I will say that the ending to the Furies I like better than the ending to Red River. In fact, I would say that the ending to the Furies would be, for me, a more appropriate ending to Red River in the sense that the movie clearly wants to venerate the John Wayne character and be like, well, he was not great, but he wasn't a good person, but he was a great person in a way. And this movie is kind of also trying to skirt that line. And in this one, it's more so just like you're like, well, when John Wayne's playing a role, you kind of just assume the way he carries himself and just his whole persona, you just you graft greatness onto him in a way. And I almost wish that Red River had ended with them being like, oh, a two-way split or something, and then he gets killed, something where he actually pays the price. So I don't think this ending is as much of a betrayal as the ending to Red River, but it is one of those issues.
It just feels like it blinks in the last like couple of minutes after this. I mean, really savage drama. And you're watching this character played by Barbara Stanwyck, who's rarely been better than she is in this movie. But when she sees that this woman that her father's in love with is threatening to kind of set her aside and what she regards as like her birthright and controlling the Furies. Yeah, she just takes a pair of scissors and just jams it right into her face. I'm like, that is the Furies at its most unhinged and unbridled. That is the true face of the movie, The Furies. And I feel like, yeah, that's the reason I enjoy watching the movie, is just watching ruthless people doing ruthless things in unapologetic fashion.
Yeah. So the first time I'd watched this was years ago, and I was probably drunk. And I didn't love it. I didn't hate it, but there was something like off about it. And now having like read the novel, and I was kind of regretting. I was not regretting it, but I was dreading the novel because I was like, do I want to watch a whole novel about like this sort of like this like in many ways like this soap opera melodrama, rich family intrigue kind of stuff. But I was like, well, whatever. And outside of a couple things, and the ending is maybe iffy, but I came away from it like really loving the novel. And then coming back to the movie, it kind of solidified what my issues were with the movie, and also maybe understand why those issues are there. The movie is, in a way, it's what's interesting about it coming out the same year as Winchester 73 is that I feel that it is.
I mean, almost the same month. They're like 4 weeks apart. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, exactly. And there are clear things that you can find that overlap between them. This whole, familial thing. This whole, there's this patricide sort of element and other things there, and families against each other, and this big action sequence in the rocks and all that. There's things that are similar, but it is also a testament to how how loose the Western genre can be, how much it can contain within itself, but also just how much diversity is in a filmmaker who is so has such a clear way of doing things, but you can see just in the same year, in the same genre, two completely different takes on the Western genre. And this is a movie that where Winchester 73 is streamlined in a way that you just need a couple lines of dialogue, but for the most part, it can almost be a silent film. And this one feels like a movie where there's so much about the novel and so much about the psychology and all that they need to kind of express. And it comes out, I think, in ways that are oftentimes there's almost too much. There's almost too much dialogue. The novel is very much in their characters' heads, so it'll tell you this. He was thinking this, he was doing this, and it feels like when they were trying to transfer it into a movie, a lot of that stuff comes out in exposition. So at the same time, though, the visuals become, in a way, more like a silent film or more Baroque in the sense of the compositions and the Gothic look of the everything.
Yeah,
so it's
it almost looks like Orson Welles' Macbeth. You're like, where was this shot and what time of day? Like, why does it look so unusual compared to every other Western I've ever seen? But the visuals are stunning.
Yeah, exactly. So it's almost like he's trying to visually evoke silent films, because I think in a way he knows that the script has to be reliant on a certain level of exposition. You can't tell this story through action. This is not a story you can tell.
With the Herreras, and there's so much history with the dead wife of TC, and there's so much strange history of what may be a father and a daughter who are a little bit overly preoccupied with each other's sex lives and who they married. I mean, like, they're territorial and threatened, and they both want the best for each other, but at the same time, they don't want anybody that might take any of their power or influence. And it's truly Shakespearean in its magnitude. But man, I've never seen like the sexual politics of this movie. I mean, for 1950, like the scene where Barbara Stanwyck is talking to her husband to be, and she's like, you'd like to slap me right now, wouldn't you? And he's like, yes, I would. Smacks her, and she starts smiling, and she's like, and now you'd like to kiss me right now, wouldn't you? And he's like, yes, I would. And he kisses her, and then she takes like a pork chop and puts it in between her teeth and walks away. I was like, what the fuck was that? Like, it's very stimulating, saucy stuff. And I imagine that for a lot of people, seeing Barbara Stanwyck do that. Actually, I won't say it wouldn't be shocking, because she'd already done Double Indemnity, where she was completely, utterly ruthless, like the ultimate femme fatale. But yeah, just every time people talk about Hollywood being squeaky clean in the 1950s, I'm like, well, you're just not watching the right movies.
Oh yeah, no, not at all. I mean, this is a very, yeah, this is a very perverted movie. So it's fascinating, because I don't love the Furies, and I've only seen it twice now. It feels like material that Mann like loves, because it has these connections to King Lear and the classics and all that. But it also feels like material that, from a script level, the movie doesn't have a hold of. And so in the script itself, the Vance character, Barbara Stanwyck's character, she's 19. And she already has this Mexican lover, on her ranch. She has two brothers. The movie cuts one of the brothers out. And what ends up happening is her father comes back. So the father had their mother, the matriarch of the family, had left the father because she had found out that she knew he had affairs and stuff, but
one was living on the property. I got that far in the book where, he had his girlfriend living under the guise of like an employee, but he had his side piece living there on his giant spread of land.
Not only was it that he had a side piece, but more so that he had a side piece who was a native girl who he'd bought from the Apaches. And they kind of have maybe a suggestion of that in the.
And they specify the Apache don't sell their own, but she was a captive of the Apache, so they were happy to sell her.
Yes, yeah, exactly. And so it was more so that he was cheating on her with an Indian, I think, more so than that he was just cheating, period. So and so then so she's already like I think been dead, and he missed her funeral and everything, and so the children are very like resentful of that. But Vance is the only one who kind of sees it his way. And then he comes back and everything, and also about the IOUs that comes later in the novel.
I wish I could print my own currency. Yeah, they're back to my word. He just, anytime he needs money, he just will create his own currency and force people to accept them as actual dollars. I'm like, all right, but of course they proved to be his undoing, at least in the movie.
Yes, well, no, that's and in the book too. But in the book, when he's going to be coming, she runs to tell her Juan, her Mexican lover, who is part of these guys who are living. They're a Mexican community, the Herreras, that have been living on this land. And they call them squatters, but they've basically been there before TC got there and everything. And
they were originally pushed off by the Spanish, but they just never left.
Yeah, exactly. And so, but she breaks it off with him because she knows her father's coming back, and she knows it's untenable to have that kind of relationship. And so she does that for her father. She's the one that, like the movie does definitely show this Electra complex, in the sense that they're basically married to each other, and they talk about how
he's always asking her to like rub his sixth lumbar or whatever. Like she acts like his wife in a lot of ways, much more so than a daughter. And he's very in her business about who her husband might be, and it's just there's way too much in each other's business. But that's what part of makes it fascinating, because Walter Houston just leans into the most perverse aspects of it. And I just love and adore Walter Houston. You introduced me to Law and Order, where he's absolutely fantastic, but clearly he is the patriarch of the Houston dynasty. It all starts with him. And as much as I love John Huston as a person and as an adventurer and as a filmmaker, everything he aspired to be, he basically learned from Walter Houston. And Walter Houston basically died of like a sudden and massive heart attack at age 66. He never even got to see this movie before it came out, but this is his last big heroic burst of theatricality. And while it's not as good a role as Treasure of the Sierra Madre, it's good enough for a final Walter Houston performance. Yeah.
So, and I'll talk more about the differences as we talk about the movie. I don't want to just give you a list of facts that happen in the book, but in terms of casting, and I have issues with some of the other casting. When I was reading the book, I couldn't imagine anyone but Walter Houston in this role. He has that. The character himself is supposed to be a bit of a ham. You know what I mean? He's like he's an old timer. He's a Westerner. He's carved his path. And so he's ruthless because he lived that way, and to carve your path in the Old West to become that successful, there's some bodies buried somewhere.
Quite literally. I mean, he talks about how I killed your father in a fair fight, and I'd be pleased to do as much for you. This is a man at the wedding of his son, who in theory might be trying to seduce his daughter, but he very openly, he was going after what they call the whatever that tract of land was, the Darrow Strip. That's basically 10% of his property, but he essentially used some sort of obscure legal technique to get access to it. The father fought him for it, and he killed him. And so, whether through legal means or other means, he's happy to just continue piecing together his property until it makes him one of the wealthiest people in the territory, and thereby one of the wealthiest people in the country.
Yeah, and so that casting is perfect. And I know that Anthony Mann talked about how great he was and how happy he was to have him as an actor. And Barbara Stanwyck, the character in the novel, luckily the movie doesn't specify her age. The character in the novel starts at the age of 19. She was already, I think, in her 40s when she was making this.
She's on the verge of possibly being an old spinster, but she's still very, very sexy and very cool, but she's not a starry-eyed young girl anymore.
No, so you don't necessarily accept her as 19, and obviously, the Mexican character of Juan, the Juan character, has to then also be aged out with Gilbert Roland, and so it's like when you watch the movie, you're like, how old are these characters? It feels a little weird, but Barbara Stanwyck herself is like perfect in the role. Um, yeah, I can't imagine a different actress from this time doing this better. You just don't, you just don't have to accept that she's 19 when it starts.
Yeah, well, she enjoyed hanging out with kind of rough, rugged men. Like she was one of the few girls that was part of Howard Hawks's circle of friends that enjoyed hunting and shooting and riding together. And so I think she enjoyed the company of men. She enjoyed rough talk, and she liked guns. And so anytime you see her in a Western, whether it's this or 40 Guns or whatever, she's very convincing. She doesn't have to really strain too much on her part.
Yeah. So in the novel, it's like the movie. He comes back. The movie has this whole thing where he's like, and it works because the character is a bit of a blowhard, but he comes in and he like is explaining to the banker guy, Albert Decker's character, like, this is El Tigre. He hung too many men. He's like giving you this whole expository like introduction, and you go, okay, well, I get why they did that. It's done more elegantly in the book. The El Tigre character is a bigger character in the book. He's way more interesting. In this, they just kind of got like a fat guy. But in the book, he's like called like Quintanilla or Quinton, something like that. But in the book, he's this ruthless character who's deaf and mute. And
what's unusual is that Thomas Gomez is so good in other movies, like Force of Evil, the Polanski movie. He's incredible in that. And so when you see Thomas Gomez show up, you think he's going to be just like the most fascinating character in the movie. Yeah, I'm a little underwhelmed by El Tigre in the movie, just having seen Force of Evil, where he and John Garfield are just so good together.
Yeah, the book, he's a bigger character and way more ruthless and imposing, and he's actually the action. It's also kind of an anticlimax too, but the action climax in the book involves his character,
Gotcha.
unlike in the movie. But so in the book, after he comes back, he's marrying off one of his sons that is not in the movie. He has two sons in the book and then one daughter. And in the movie, he's got one son and one daughter. And at the celebrations, the bride's father, who's like a judge, he's like a judge married to this Mexican lady who he's like continues getting cuckolded, so he has like multiple daughters that look like different men. The book has so much interesting, weird details that are just great. But so it's a party that's happening that TC hasn't thrown, and then there's a character who goes by like Curly, kind of like Darrow. It's like spelled differently, but they changed his name into like Zip. What's the Darrow character in this?
Rip Darrow, played by the great Wendell Corey.
Yeah. In the book,
I think it's very well cast in this movie. He doesn't strike me as much of like a Wild West kind of guy. He feels more at home in like a gangster movie or something. But he's good in Rear Window. He's good in a bunch of different things. But yeah, I like how just utterly ruthless and unromantic he is.
I think so. That's one of my issues. So in the book, he's currently like Dareth or Dara. I don't know how to say his name, but and he's a gambler and like a pimp and a saloon owner, and he's opposed to the TC character just on general principle. That he's just this guy taking up land, and he's a smaller business owner who's basically looking at this oligarchy or this monopoly, and he keeps talking shit on him. The way in the movie where he says, you stop telling lies about me, I'll stop telling the truth about you. That's from the novel.
Gotcha. That's a great line.
He doesn't have from what I can remember, he does not have like he didn't have like a Darrow strip that like TC took over, and I think the movie also says that TC like killed his dad in a duel or something. That's not in the book. he's in a way, he's just like TC. He's also a smaller businessman who is kind of growing, and he resents TC for what he's doing to the West and closing everything. But of course, Vance's character falls in love with him, and TC seems to like him because he puts him in his place, but at the same time is never going to trust him and is never going to give his daughter over to him. So in the book, when it finally comes to a head and he's going to ask TC for his daughter's hand in marriage, TC goes, "This is the $50,000 I was going to give her if I approved of the man that she married. And you're just some blacklight gambler or whatever. So I'm going to throw this in a furnace and see how." So he throws the money in a furnace and sees how the Curly or the Rip in the movie, how his character reacts. And in the book, he wants to jump and save the money from the fire, but he doesn't do it. But it's enough. His reaction is enough for Vance's character to be like, "My dad was right. You only want me for the money." It's not like in the movie where he's like, "I tricked you the whole time," you know?
Yeah. We basically says, "Here's 50 grand. You can walk out of here with the money, or you can walk out of here with my daughter, but with nothing. Just take her as she is." And looks at her. And he's so harsh to her early on in the movie, but he's always saying things like, "You're like a filly that's never had a rope on her," and that sort of thing. But like, she is kind of a wild, untamed, unmanageable creature, but obviously she evolves into a very cunning businesswoman in rapid succession, just because her heart's broken early on by Rip.
Yeah, well, the thing about the movie is that it's like, so in the movie he has all this like reason for wanting to do it outside of just not liking TC, and that's maybe more efficient in terms of a script. But then it becomes later when she's supposed to go back to him and everything, you're like, well, that's not, you know what I mean? It feels like they made him in a way even more duplicitous and mean in the movie, but only to make his turnaround less believable in the film itself. Whereas in the book, he's not doing it. It's only that he loves money and everything, but he's not like feigning this whole relationship to get revenge on TC. So later on, it just works. It works better in the book than making him so ruthless at the beginning and then expecting us to like him later.
Well, it's funny. I like him because he's ruthless, as opposed to when they try to actually make him likable. And even toward the end, he's still saying things like, "Well, I've got 10%. I'm getting 10% of the Darrow strip now, but my son, he will have all of it." And so in a weird way, he's almost kind of rubbing it in TC's face. Like, "We've been adversaries for so long, but one day when you're dead and gone, my son will control your land." And so he maintains some of his villainous qualities toward the end.
Yeah, and well, so that's my thing, is that I don't, and I think this is a big complaint for most people with this movie, I don't like Wendell Corey in this movie very much. He's fine once it's revealed that
he's miscast, or what do you think? Because I for whatever reason, I just find him hilarious, but he doesn't necessarily seem like he belongs in a Western, but it's not a deal breaker for me.
I think he's fine. He was a protege of Hal Wallace, the producer.
Gotcha.
So I think that might be why he was able to get such a big role. He's not bad. There's like, I don't look at him and go like he's just terrible, just screwing it up. I just feel that he's not making him more ruthless gives him something, but I don't think he brings much to the role. And with the Barbara Stanwyck character, who is a fascinating character, and in like the book, because she vacillates between strength and ruthlessness and cunning, but also like emotion that, you know, clouds her judgment, and you know what I mean. She's a dynamic character who has a full arc. But I watch this and I go, no, Barbara Stanwyck's not falling for this guy. It's just not. He's just not. And you go, and you know, yeah, you can fan cast a lot of people. Who knows, whatever, schedules, budgets, everything else that could go into it. But
well, dream casting, say their budgets and schedules were immaterial, who would you cast? Because another movie he's in that I really like, that I want to give a shout out to, which is more of like a film noir, I Walk Alone from 1947 with him and Burt Lancaster and Kirk Douglas. If you have a taste for late 40s crime films, it's not a noir. It feels more like a 30s gangster movie, but he's fantastic in that as well.
I feel that I'll tell you my fan casting. It's maybe not 100%, but just it's one name that comes up. But at least in this role, I feel that he, for what is in the script and what they want him to do, he's fine. He doesn't it's not like he's not believable in terms of his motivation. I don't believe that Barbara Stanwyck would fall that much for him. Number one. And it's all kind of based on well, I never said that. That's not how it is in the book. And I know why.
What if they'd hired a young Kirk Douglas?
I was honestly thinking Glenn Ford.
Okay.
Because I feel that if you put Glenn Ford in that role, you don't have to make him I want this land back. You don't have to make it to where TC killed his dad. It just feels like that Wendell Corey for me is such a blank that he's like a blank slate. If you write on him, it's fine. He carries the words, he carries the role, but he doesn't bring anything to it. And I feel that you could have done less exposition with somebody who is you immediately believe as fully realized, and that could seduce Barbara Stanwyck's character. And you don't need it I'm getting my land back to my family. It could just be I don't like your dad, or
what if they reunited Barbara Stanwyck with Fred McMurray from Double Indemnity?
Well, Fred McMurray wouldn't be my number one choice, but I feel he would have brought something more to it than Wendell Corey.
Well, so people say that would have just brought that history because they'd obviously they'd loved and killed side by side before, only a few years prior.
Yeah, and so that so that's one thing in terms of the differences. And so in the book, she basically goes to her dad's side after this in the movie, this banker character, in the novel, this gambler character kind of proves that he was in it for the money to a certain degree. In the book, it's the money is his character is more multifaceted, where you go, just like all the characters, you can feel that he does probably love her and everything, but the money is a part of it, right? And so because that's always a part of it, she always doubts his intentions. So when her father does this big show of him, how much he loves the money, right? It's his way of trying to prove to her that he's not actually right for her. Whereas in the movie, it's more obvious that, yeah, he's trying to pull this thing over on her. So then, so in the book itself, so she's broken off with Juan, this guy she's in love with, and then she's broken off with this gambler character. Okay. And this is all this is all because of what her dad has basically pushed her to do. Right. So then later on, when her dad brings back this wife or fiance or whatever,
the adventuress, the girl who clearly is after his money, and she's been married, she's old, but she's powerful, knows the president, and yeah, she's going to rapidly try to take over the Furies.
Yes, yeah. And
played by Judith Anderson, who people will remember from Rebecca, as well as Star Trek III: The Search for Spock.
So in the book. So in the movie, because the Wendell Corey character so clearly betrays Barbara Stanwyck, she can't put that on her dad, right? And then the whole thing about not wanting to be with Juan, it's not like he ever fully demanded this. The movie has to do other narrative things to get there. Whereas in the book, she's basically given up both of her loves and hasn't gotten betrayed by them, but more so that she's done it for her father, right? And then so in the book, she's the one that orders the the Mexican enforcer El Tigre in the movie, Quintanilla or something in the book. She's the one that calls the raid on the Herreras, where they're dropping rocks on them and stuff. And it's way better in the book. And in the book, they're getting rocks dropped on them and their heads are getting crushed. It's very violent. And
Yeah, one guy gets his leg nicked in the movie, but yeah, they did not show any heads getting crushed.
Oh no, they're crushing heads and stuff. But even more so, Juan's mother in the book is up there with a rifle. They kind of show it in the movie, but she's up there smoking a bunch of pot. So she's high out of her mind with a rifle, just laughing her ass off as she's killing all these guys.
She does some of that in the movie as well. Though she's laughing and shooting. She's hell on wheels, and yeah, she gets her revenge at the very end.
They put it a little bit in the movie, but I think they have her drinking in the movie because you couldn't show someone high out of their mind, I guess. But they ended up killing her in that scene in the book. And I don't know if Juan is ever aware that she's the one that orders it. But anyway, so then later on, when her father takes this floozy of a wife, he will never approve of any man that she is going to marry. But now he's marrying this floozy who just wants money.
He doesn't maintain any of the high standards for himself that he maintains for her. Like he has that line early on about how it's yours for a dowry if you pick a man I can favor, one I can sit down with at a table and not dislodge my chow. But he's maintaining incredibly high standards, and she keeps saying, like, my husband's going to be a man of my own choosing, whether you like him or not. But he immediately betrays her. And I think that's when the movie's at its most interesting, because every family can relate to an aging patriarch who's getting foolish in his own old age, perhaps indulging in a love affair that might end up being self-destructive with someone who's clearly after his money, his property, his balls, or all the above. And I find that incredibly satisfying when Barbara Stanwyck finally she's had enough. They keep saying, oh, like, wouldn't it be nice if you just went and toured Europe for a while? Wouldn't it be nice if you went off and got married? Like, they keep trying to foist upon her all these things that she clearly does not want. And when she finally just jabs her in the face with a pair of scissors, leaving her partially paralyzed, like, yeah, that's what you get for fucking with Barbara Stanwyck. What do you expect? Like, she's a creature of the Wild West. And so I think that's when the movie really shines, showing Barbara Stanwyck's rage during those scenes.
Yeah, well, so what ends up happening in the book is that she comes, and then obviously Barbara Stanwyck's character is like, when's this lady going to leave? And then she finally finds out that they're going to get married. And then I think in the book, because she's acting up, the stepmother wants to send her away somewhere. In the movie, I like to a boarding school kind of thing. In the movie, I don't think that plotline would work, just because Barbara Stanwyck was
a little too long on the tooth to go to boarding school at that point.
So old. But in the book, she actually sneaks into her room, and while she's sleeping, stabs her in the face with the scissors.
Whoa.
And assumes that she's murdered her. Then she goes on the run and hides out with Juan and his family, the Herreras and everything. And so later on, she's living with them. She ends up marrying the Jose character and becoming part of their community and everything. But then basically TC shuts him out of, like, he can't get work anywhere else. And I think he becomes a cowboy for him or something. But basically, they end up sending out a calf that he then rustles, because it's a maverick calf or whatever. And she's like, well, what are you doing that for? You know, like, be careful. And he's like, yeah, God sent it to us or whatever. Well, it turns out that TC did that on purpose so that he could catch him rustling one of his cattle so that he could legally hang him from there, you know. And
that's the scene where I first discovered the movie in Martin Scorsese's documentary, A Personal Journey Through American Filmmaking with Martin Scorsese. That's the scene that he really calls attention to when Barbara Stanwyck was like, do you want me to beg? And he's like, anyway, there's a whole scene where Juanito tells Barbara Stanwyck that you will not humble yourself. You won't beg. It's not going to do any good in any way. And Walter Houston ends up killing him then and there right in front of her. And that's when she declares, I'm going to take everything you've ever had away from you. But that scene has such, like, raw emotional power. That's what Scorsese chose to include when it's basically the chapter of the documentary is going over all of his favorite Westerns. And so that's how I first even realized that, like, the Furies was a movie that was even out there.
Yeah. And that's one of the things I think when I saw it, the first time, and then even watching it again after having read the book, that feels, well, the scene itself is good, but what feels off is the characterization of Juan, because because I don't know if it was because his character was Mexican and they didn't want to fully embrace that she's married him and was, you know what I mean? Because he's kind of feels like, you know, to use the phrase friend zoned for the whole movie, where it's like you're kissing me like a friend and stuff.
Yeah, the kiss
Whereas
of a good friend, as he keeps using that line throughout the movie.
yeah, whereas in the novel, she clearly loves him, but knows that it can't go anywhere. So then ends up treating him like a friend, and it even
And in
runs
the
through
novel,
her
they're
mind.
clearly banging as well. At least it's implied early on.
Yeah, so there's way more explicit banging in the novel. Not that it describes the banging, but it's more explicit that that's what
But
they're
it's
doing.
abundantly clear that
Yeah.
they've been spending some special alone time together.
Yeah, and so then, and even and it goes all through her mind. That's what I love about the novel is it goes through her mind of like breaking it off with him, but also like her psychologically, like less so like what it means doing that, and more so like, do I look good doing it? Am I breaking it off like in a good way? Like she's like looking at herself, and more so like, am I breaking him off in the correct way? Like that I can manipulate him? Like she's always viewing herself, and that's what you kind of see in the movie. They try to put the psychological stuff in the dialogue, and in a way that for this time, doesn't always fully work. But anyway, at least in that stuff, at least the one character is married to her by that point. She's part of the community and stuff. With the movie, when it's truncated and they're not developing that, the mother has TC in her sights, and in the book, TC is not in that scene when they blow up the mother smoking pot with dynamite. But it's one of those frustrating things where it's like, don't shoot her. Like he makes his whole family back down, and then he's this sacrificial character, and it's just like, well, it's like the sacrificial minority where he's like, he's not even like, he's not a fully realized character. He's a Latin lover sort of type who's willing to who's willing to not only sacrifice himself, but in a way his whole family, because he's so in love with this lady that's friend zoned him. So when you're watching it, you're just frustrated, like, no, don't do that.
I do share your frustration there, because when I watch it, it seems like somehow he lets himself get outfoxed by TC, where if he had found a way to surrender and they would leave the lands, but everybody was like, his clan was able to stay together, then I could get it. But the fact that he's both surrenders and immediately gets strung up with very little fanfare or resistance, I do feel some frustration there that the movie kind of does him dirty.
Yeah, it just feels like he's a character who's like knows that the movie is about these people, so now and as opposed to being a fully realized character. Whereas in the novel, she is his wife, and even in the novel, it's not as clear as like he stops his mother from shooting Tease. He doesn't. I don't even know if he's aware that she's actually the one that ordered the raid that ended up killing his mother in the novel. But it just doesn't. It just there's something about it, and I guess I think that's one of the issues I had when I first saw it, is that you have these. It's just like it's sympathetic. It includes these Mexican characters and is sympathetic to them, but it doesn't actually give them a full amount of agency. They're essentially just victims. And when there's actually a character who's willing to fight against these other ones, he gives it all up because he just really likes her a lot. Like he's not even getting any, you know what I mean? So it's just like you're just less willing to go along with his sacrifice. So you just instead of it being like, whoa, it really got to that level, you're more so like, well, this guy's an idiot, and it just kind of makes me dislike all the characters from that point on.
Gotcha. So at that point, you just see like there's no recovering, like, or getting back into the swing of things just because.
Yeah, and I still like the movie, but it is to me very obvious when they are trying to take narrative shortcuts. And like it's like anything, if it's a fully realized novel, it is hard to get everything about it crammed in there. And I think this movie has a little bit of that. Whereas like Winchester 73 obviously has a historical basis, but it's in a way based on a 29-page treatment by Stuart Lake that was never developed. So you know what I mean? So it has a streamlined place to go with just good foundation. Whereas the Furies is trying its best to import all the psychological stuff from the novel, and it manifests itself in ways that are either very expository or are great scenes and everything in isolation. But you're like, am I being carried this whole way through, or am I, do I have to kind of fill in certain gaps to make the movie work better than it actually is working? Anyway.
So if you were to sit down with some of the essayists and critics and whatnot who have gone on and on about the I guess the Freudian dimensions and that sort of thing, would you basically just try to, like, because I feel like for me, the parts of the movie that work the best are obviously the parts between Barbara Stanwyck and Walter Houston. And I totally share a lot of your frustrations about how Juanito is just not as fully realized as some of his other counterparts are. Would you try to tell them to tap the brakes on their overwhelming enthusiasm for because it seems like for a lot of people who don't watch any Westerns, the Furies is one that they talk about a lot, especially a lot of women critics really get in. I think the commentary is actually by a female film historian. I think Imogen Sarah Smith, who I'm aware of on social media. But yeah, there are definitely legions of admirers out there.
Well, I get that, and I think that watching the Furies in isolation, you could either come away from it being like, this is a little incomprehensible and it's not working, or you could be like, well, he's trying this and there's a lot of fascinating things. It's not a typical Western. It's doing this different, and it's not like he's like completely. It's not like the material has run away from him, but it's more so that he's trying to control the material, and it's very interesting and very Baroque, and it has a lot of things to it that are could be considered novel in the Western genre. The female lead, that's also not something that is a big thing for Anthony Mann. At least in his Westerns, they're always kind of about a guy on a mission or something to that effect. So I think if you weren't aware, hadn't read the novel, I think you could maybe come away from it either thinking it was an interesting experiment or thinking that it really works well. For me, it's hard to look at it. Like, I appreciate the adaptation. I appreciate how much they're willing to fit in there, and the shortcuts and the narrative shorthand that they have to use. I think they do a good job. I don't necessarily think that this form is the best thing for the material in the novel. The novel, I feel, is the characters are all none of them are very sympathetic. They're all selfish to a degree, but they're multifaceted, and you get into their characters more, and you have sympathy for all of them. So that one thing that the novel does, and the movie does it too, but what really makes the novel really start working, like Niven Bush puts so many great details in it. I mentioned that the Curly Dara character has he's got these bodyguards. One's like this obese guy. One's like a hunchback. The Vance character works in his saloon as like a shotgun guard and stuff. It has all these fascinating Baroque details. At the end when they assassinate TC, Juan's family, the Herreras, it talks about how one of them tried to escape some of them escaped, one of them got shot, one of them tried to escape in an outhouse, and a guy went in there to pee and caught him, and then like beat him down and then like stepped on him as he was finishing peeing and stuff. It's like it's got a bunch of like funny, amazing like little details about the world and stuff that you really can't get in a movie. So like I would fully recommend reading the novel. It has this whole scene.
So a rare case where you like the Blu-ray package, but you like it due to the fact that it contains the book as opposed to the movie.
No. I love that it contained the book. But I just feel that under the circumstances, they probably did the best they could with the material, because it would otherwise have to be this a longer movie that maybe should have been made at a different time when you could get away with a lot more. But Niven Bush is a screenwriter, so it's still, even after TC's killed, it still has this whole kind of section where Vance is like, she gets with the Curly character, or in this the Rip character, but she's like, was he involved with the murder of TC? Like, she still has the development of like that she still has sympathy for her father, that she hates him but has sympathy, and the novel does that way better, where they're working on those same terms all the time. But like I'm saying, what makes the novel work is when they've tricked TC, when they've got all his IOUs, and they basically trick him into, because he's basically bankrupt. They trick him into
rounding up all
running
this cattle, and he's selling all this cattle for the worthless currency that he's been distributing all these years.
Yeah, and the movie does it a little bit, but the novel, you really will, you start to love that they're doing this whole scheme, but then you get caught up in his whole thing, and you're almost sympathetic to him. And the movie does that a little bit too.
Kind of rooting for him to make one final comeback.
Yeah, exactly. But the novel just sustains it better, to where that you are always aware. Whereas the movie, it feels like, okay, it's like, we'll be three partners, and then he got killed, but we'll have a song dedicated to him at the end because he was such a great man. And I don't think the movie really gets his character down to earn that, and the book doesn't venerate him in such a obvious cloying way, but you have more of his full character, that you do appreciate him better. So the Furies, I think, is still like a very interesting Western. I think it's good. I think it's worth seeing if you're an Anthony Mann fan. And it's solid, but it's more interesting for, I think, seeing him wrestle with the material and doing his best with wrestling with it, as opposed to Winchester 73, where I think and most of the Jimmy Stewart, Anthony Mann collaborations, I think he's, for the most part, in control of that material. So that's where I think that's the biggest value of the Furies. But it's still, Stamik's great in it. Houston's great in it. Gilbert Rowland is great in it. It's beautifully shot. It has just great composition. So it's still worth seeing, but I kind of see where it falls short, I guess.
Fair enough. Well, before we wrap up this episode, I wanted to just get either one word or one sentence responses, but I'm going to show you just a few images from a few upcoming Anthony Mann Westerns. And whether you love them, hate them, or indifferent to them, or haven't seen them, or whatever, just let me know, just as a way of kind of presenting what comes next. So off the top of your head, any strong feelings about Bend of the River?
I think I like Bend of the River a lot. I need to revisit all these. I haven't seen most of these Anthony Mann movies in probably over a decade.
Gotcha,
so Bend of the River and The Far Country.
I did the same thing like 10 or 11 years ago. I watched all the Anthony Mann Westerns in a row, and then I kind of left them alone for like another decade until you and I tackled Winchester 73 for Wrong Reel, and now I'm kind of revisiting a lot of them.
Yeah, Bend to the River and the Far Country, they kind of bleed into each other. So I can't remember which one's
Bend of the
which.
River is Academy Ratio, and the Far Country is CinemaScope. But what about The Naked Spur?
The Naked Spur, I don't love, I think I've seen it like maybe twice or three times, and I come away from it not loving it each time. But like I said, that was a long time ago, so I'm gonna have to check it again. I know a lot of people. It's one of those things. It's similar to like Bedecker. There are like certain movies where it's like you could almost choose a certain run of movies, and almost any of them would be a good like choice for their best one. So I know a lot of people consider The Naked Spur like the best of
Scorsese's
the.
obsessed with it.
I don't love it, honestly. I would have to see it again. I don't know. I know we just talked about the Tall T, and that's like top 10, one of my favorite westerns. Um, and I don't know. I think The Naked Spur is for me in a way like uh, just a lesser version of that. One location. I don't know. There's just stuff about it I don't love. He throws this spur in a guy's face. It's just I don't love it.
All right.
I don't love The Naked Spur.
To be continued at a later date. What about The Far Country?
Like I said, Bend of the River. I know I like Bend of the River and the Far Country. I know I like them both a lot. I know I like them both better than the Naked Spur. I couldn't tell you which one I like better than the other.
Fair enough. Well, what about the very first Anthony Mann movie that I ever saw at the theater at a Western revival? I think at the Monica 4 in LA, summer 97 or summer 98. But The Man from Laramie, the final James Stewart Anthony Mann Western.
I think this one is great, but like I said, once again, I'll have to check it out again just to where it would put it. As of right now, I put it below Winchester 73, and I would probably put it below Bend of the River and the Far Country, maybe, but I think I put it even below those ones.
What about Henry Fonda and Anthony Perkins in The Tin Star?
I remember liking the Tin Star a lot. I know this is kind of one that gets. I think it's one of Anthony Mann's movies that doesn't get as much.
Well, it's weird. He goes from these big Technicolor CinemaScope movies back to black and white Academy Ratio, but it's a cool flick. I haven't seen it in over 10 years, but I remember liking it at the time.
Yeah, exactly. I've always thought it was a lot of fun. I mean, it has his, from what I remember, it has his like storytelling and all that, but it's very different from his other westerns. But also, it's very, it feels of a piece of a lot of westerns made at that time, a lot of TV westerns, or even stuff like a High Noon, or it feels like or a 3:10 to Yuma. It feels like in that somewhat of in that mold, but that one I think I rank not with the Winchester 73 or the other ones, but I think I rank that one pretty high, maybe even better than The Man from Laramie.
What about Gary Cooper, Man of the West, playing a bit of a bad guy, but with lots of family dysfunctionality?
I rank Man of the West pretty high too, so I would put that under Winchester 73, maybe on the same level of a Bend of the River, Far Country, Tin Star. That one I like a lot. Gary Cooper is maybe a bit miscast in terms of age, but it works.
He's getting a little long in the tooth. The only Anthony Mann Western I've not seen from this period is The Last Frontier from 1955. Any strong feelings about that bad boy?
Oh, I think it's good, but I would have to see it again. I remember liking it, but I don't remember ranking it super high. I might put it on this. I don't know. I might put it around like Naked Spur. I think I like all of his westerns. For the most part, I think that Cimarron is maybe one that I I think Cimarron is the one I'd probably put the lowest.
Fair enough. Yeah, I've not seen Cimarron just because I know that it wasn't, he wasn't there from start to finish. He was shown the door at a certain point, or he quit. I'm not quite sure if he quit or was fired, but anyway, it wasn't the complete Anthony Mann experience. And I think at that point, it's hard to move on to movies like El Cid, which fucking rules. But I love how in El Cid, because the movie's in English, no one ever introduces him as El Cid. At one point, this person says, "And we call that man the Cid." I'm like, you know what? That doesn't work. You can't be the Cid. You got to be El Cid.
Just use the title. Well, what about Devil's Doorway? Have you seen that one?
I have. I haven't seen it in about 10 years, but Devil's Doorway, actually, just as a way of kind of sharing one last clip for everybody to enjoy. I think do I have the trailer? Actually, no, I don't think I have the trailer. I thought I had it. I fucked up. I forgot to upload it. I apologize. But do I even have the poster? Anyway, here it is. Booyakasha. Devil's Doorway, Robert Taylor. And I thought I had the trailer, but I do not.
Yeah, that's Anthony Mann, doing a more socially conscious Western. And that might have been, I always get confused this year, 1950 especially, because I'm like, which one did he make first? So I think
he shot it, Devil's Doorway, The Furies, Winchester 73, and then they got released in the exact opposite order.
Yeah, exactly. This one was the one that was released, the last one. I know he for sure did this before Winchester 73, but yeah, I think it was also before The Furies. Because this is the one that Jimmy Stewart had seen. And this was, Jimmy Stewart had done, like you were saying, Broken Arrow, which is a movie with very similar themes and everything. Anthony Mann, because he directed, he was a stage director, claims that he directed Jimmy Stewart
like in 1934 or something like that. Yeah.
Yeah. But Jimmy Stewart himself, he didn't remember. I don't know if Anthony Mann is just telling tall tales or what.
He might have. I mean, and Jimmy Stewart also tells tall tales. He has a likable affectation in the commentary track. He's like, well, I don't know if this is the exact truth. And if I'm told the story before, or maybe I've told it the wrong way, but I've told it so many times that way. Anyway, like he just acknowledges there's certain tall tales that he's repeated so many times. That's how he's going to tell the story, even if some people might recognize it might not be precisely how things went down. I was like, all right, well, at least you're just acknowledging that. Yeah, you like telling interesting stories, whether they are, strict adherence to the truth or not.
Yeah. Well, he's because I believe in that commentary they ask him, and he seems to like I think it's seen Devil's Doorway. It's like, who is this guy? He'd never heard of him. Maybe because Anthony Mann's real name was like Bunsman or something.
Yeah. So T-Man was a hit, but it wasn't like some big giant runaway smash. Like he was still operating in relative obscurity, but T-Man which is a cool flick, was like his first real big claim to fame. And of course he did Railroaded and Raw Deal, but it seems like he was just kind of really starting to get his momentum going. Yeah.
Well, we'll take Anthony Mann at his word. So, but apparently Anthony Mann had directed Jimmy Stewart in a stage play. And if Jimmy Stewart didn't remember him, that makes sense why he probably wouldn't remember every director he worked with. But it also makes sense why Anthony Mann would remember that he'd already worked with Jimmy Stewart. So that's supposedly the story, that they'd already made movies. They'd already worked on a play together before they ever made movies together. But yeah, they're Anthony Mann. He's one of the greats. He's not perfect, but it's he did a lot for the Westerns, and it's fascinating to see that in the same year. And this also, I think, the same year he did The Tall Target, the one about people trying to assassinate Abraham Lincoln on a train or whatever. Have you seen that one?
I have not. I've seen Border Incident, which is Western adjacent, but not a Western. It's got cars, but it's like in the Southwest. Like I've seen a lot of his work, but and I saw the Glenn Miller Story, and I've seen historical epics. So I've seen probably like 12 or 13 of his movies, but I still have plenty left to see.
Yeah, The Tall Target is also somewhat Western adjacent. It's the general time period and stuff. That's a good one to see. But anyway, but
he's just one of those directors where I feel like there's some great directors where they do maybe one or two great Westerns, someone like George Stevens. Then there's some directors like Sergio Corbucci where they make a million Westerns. And I just like Anthony Mann, he just kept cranking them out and refining and working on it. And irrespective of how people rank his Western output, once again, if you like the genre or you like the period or you like the era, sooner or later you got to wrestle with Anthony Mann's Western output. And I think there are a lot of good ones to be discovered. I think for me, my favorites would be Far Country, Winchester 73, and just because it was my first, The Man from Laramie, but I have not watched The Man from Laramie in a long time. I need to revisit it to see if it holds up to my memories from the late 90s.
Yeah, well, my Anthony Mann rankings, I have to go back and analyze each film on its own before I could ever do a great ranking. But I do want to say, just for this year, the 3 westerns that he did do mark a very. It's very interesting because he has his socially conscious western with The Devil's Doorway. He has his,
Freudian
Gothic, Freudian, romance, female led, in a way, not more novel or western that's more offbeat. And then he has Winchester 73, which is just one of the best pure westerns. Every aspect about it is western. You know what I mean? It's one
Has
of the
any
most
other director
westerns
ever
of all time.
released 3 western features inside of 2 months like this?
I would have to look it up, but
yeah. At a minimum, he's got his hat trick. It's a very rare accomplishment where if you are a Western fan in the summer of 1950, from the middle of July through the middle of September, one director could keep you very well entertained.
Yeah, exactly. And if there's a director who's released more westerns within that small span of time, I highly doubt there was a Western director that released 3 westerns of that quality. And even though I'm not like in love with the Furies, I still think it's a great western to watch. I think it's worth seeing. And the same thing with Devil's Doorway. They're both great and worth seeing. And Winchester 73 is a must see. It's absolutely one of the best purest westerns ever made.
Well, on that note, we're going to wrap up this video. Let us know what you think down in the comments below and what are the Western topics we might consider using to lure David Lambert back in the future. He's been very generous as of late, giving us a lot of content, but we'll try to come up with something really, really saucy to seduce him back over to the dark side in the months to come. But remember to like, subscribe, hit that notification bell. Mr. Lambert, where can people find your art, your social media, etc., and so forth?
David Lambert Art on Twitter. That's where you'll see all my stuff about westerns, western movies, western history, some of my artwork. David Figure Art on Twitter. That's where you'll see my naked people, the naked people I draw. And then also Instagram, David Lambert Art, and Patreon, David Lambert Art.
And he's taking requests. If you want him to paint Jimmy Stewart buck-ass nude, he will. You heard it here first.
Yeah, well, depending if the price is right. Exactly. Oh, and then also David Lambert also on Blue Sky, if that's your orientation. I also post Western history, Western movie facts, and all that there too. So David Lambert Art, find me in those places.
Fantastic. Well, on that note, I'll say, as always, onwards and upwards.
Ain't like it used to be, but it'll do.
You know how to whistle, don't you, Steve? You just put your lips together and blow.